Committee resumes with the Department of Treasury Markets Group, and I go to Senator Smith.
Thank you. Mr Phillips, just to finish off a line of questioning that I pursued previously, has the Treasury ever made any representation to the Department of Employment about single interest multi-employer agreements potentially being anti-competitive or a form of wage fixing?
One moment, Senator. I'll see colleagues.
Would be a lot of people if the answer's no.
Dr. Freestone, you want to?
Jason McDonald from the Competition Task Force. The Competition Task Force hasn't, Senator, but there may be other parts of Treasury that have, but it's not our responsibility for that policy issue.
That's why I thought I'd direct the question to Mr Phillip and not...
I understand, Senator. I'm not familiar with elsewhere in the Treasury providing advice on that issue to the Department of Employment.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So the answer was you're not aware?
I'm not aware.
That's great. Thank you very much.
I mean, consistent with Mr McDonald, whether somewhere else has or not, I don't know.
Great. Thanks very much. I'll turn to the matter of the CDR. Mr Kelly, is the CDR in some form of purgatory?
So, Senator,
would you like an update on CDR?
We'll soon discover. We'll soon discover. We'll soon discover.
Yes.
So I might just begin with some questions, Mr Kelly. Since the passage of the Action Initiation Bill on August the 15th of this year, what work has Treasury undertaken to determine the first actions to be included in the CDR, and what time frames is Treasury working on?
So, Senator, the Minister in early August kind of gave a clear direction as to what the work we would be doing on CDR, and that related to making rules around improvements to consents and operational enhancements and extension of CDR to non-bank lending sector. The Minister, in what he said publicly, was also clear that that would be that and some other work would be the focus, and not making rules to allow action initiation to happen or to designate particular actions.
So what's the progress of that?
So we have, the Minister released draft consent and operational enhancement rules. We've now finalised the consultation and finalised those rules and have just made those available to the Minister. So expectation is that they will be made soon. We're also very well progressed in providing the Minister with a draft rules to extend non-bank lending, CDR to non-bank lending, and should have that with the Minister soon.
So recommendations or a course of action has been provided to the Minister, and a further set of recommendations is expected soon.
So rules are the kind of CDR version of regulations, which can be made by the Minister. So we've provided since the first instalment of final rules relating to improving the consent arrangements in CDR and some operational enhancements, such as allowing banks to more easily be able to use CDR themselves. So that is now with the Minister, just very recently. So our expectation is they will be made soon by the Minister. And then for non-bank, extending CDR to non-bank lending, the Minister's kind of flagged the timetable for that to happen. First part of that will be to do consultations on draft rules. Those draft rules will be with the Minister soon.
Great. And Senator Gallagher, will Minister Jones be dealing with these matters expeditiously?
Well, I can't answer on behalf of him, but I would expect so. You know, that is his approach. He's a hard-working minister with a lot on his plate.
In relation to the CDR bill that passed the Parliament, passed the Senate recently, is Treasury aware of why there was such a significant delay to the bill being debated and then finally passed in the Senate?
That's not a matter for Treasury. That was a matter
Minister Gallagher, perhaps you could illuminate.
Yeah, it was a matter of, you know, our legislative program and getting agreement and getting it done.
No, it sat on the program.
Yeah,
It
but it's
sat on
all,
the program.
well, as you know,
then
Senator
it was
Smith, you don't
withdrawn
see
from the
one bill in
program.
isolation. There's a whole lot of considerations given to the legislative program.
Mr Kelly, did the Minister's office raise any specific concerns about the bill or tell you why it wasn't progressing? Why it wasn't being brought to a debate in the Senate?
I mean, Senator, we had discussions with the office at times around the bill and whether it needed to progress. I can't think of a discussion that kind of was expressed in the way you've put it. It's been the case for CDR for a while now, where we've been going through a process of, late, so in the 23-24 budget, the government kind of put a pause on expansion beyond non-bank lending sector into other sectors. We've been doing a lot of work to understand some of the issues that are affecting the consumer data right around costs for the data holders is one example of that, and some of the barriers to the use of CDR. So we did a public consultation on could we replace screen scraping and be able to rely on CDR as a viable alternative. The answer for that, a very short answer, is not yet. So we've been doing that kind of body of work, and now the Minister's kind of set the direction for CDR, reflecting that work and the sort of issues that we need to address to make sure CDR works efficiently. And the Minister's indicated that action initiation is not a priority at this stage, and that's been the way. Given those other issues, that's been our focus as well, is to make CDR work as well as it can before trying to expand it too fast.
Did Treasury consult or work on any amendments to the CDR bill?
What are you referring to move amendments that were not moved, or well,
work on any amendments that the Senate may not have seen in the end?
Well,
work
I
on
think the
amendments that the
Treasury
government
worked
may not
with
have
the
brought
Assistant
forward.
Treasurer on the CDR, and the bill, as agreed to by the Parliament, has passed. So we're not going to go into the nature of any things that may or may not have happened. Like, there were no amendments moved from my
It's not my question.
recollection.
My question was to Mr Kelly. Did the Treasury consult or work on any amendments to the bill? Not whether or not any bills, whether amendments were introduced to the Senate.
All right,
because
because
I would have known
what actually happened doesn't matter. It's what may have happened.
It's the work that was perhaps happening that the Senate didn't see any light of. Mr Kelly?
Senator, I'd have to take that on notice.
In his speech at CEDA on August the 9th, Minister Jones stated the CDR will expand non-bank lending data early in the new year with the intent to be operational by the middle of 2026. Is that a deadline that the Minister is continuing to work to?
That is the deadline we're working to, Senator. And
thank you.
At this stage, we're confident we can achieve it.
Thank you, Mr Kelly. Many experts have long argued that the restrictions on derived data use are stifling innovation within the CDR. What are the specific risks that Treasury is concerned about regarding the scope of entities that can receive CDR data?
That's kind of a big question. So, Senator, in some ways, one way to think about what's the issue of derived data is CDR has its own kind of data protection and data handling and use requirements that sit separately and above what's in the Privacy Act. So if you're a recipient of CDR data and you're in that kind of in the CDR system, you have to handle that data in a particular way, and you've got to be ready, say, to delete it on request and those sorts of things. And if you combine CDR data with other data you hold, that also means then all that other data and kind of data information derived from that becomes subject to CDR and those additional rules. So in some ways, having the differential treatment of data is given, in some ways, recipients and people thinking about business models to use CDR an interest and an incentive not to get into the CDR system because it comes with these overlays and costs.
So the Treasury's argument is that the Privacy Act principles may not provide sufficient consumer protection?
So, Senator, the issue in some ways that CDR confronted when it started was Privacy Act wasn't then at a kind of process of, so at the moment another portfolio is considering reforms to the Privacy Act, and I think the first tranche of legislation's being proceeded with. But there is a kind of general view that the Privacy Act of itself has failings in some areas, and one really obvious example of where there are issues, it has a kind of carve out for certain small businesses. So in the CDR system, where a lot of the recipients are fintechs, then often they start very small. So you just got this gap of kind of the Privacy Act wasn't seen as fit for purpose. CDR created its own set of rules to kind of deal with that issue, but now the issue we face is that the differences between those rules really generates or affects the incentives of fintechs and other people to use CDR to deliver useful innovations and efficient kind of outcomes for consumers.
So the Privacy Act considerations, who is the Treasury consulting with around that? So Attorney General's Department, or is it just within the Treasury?
So, Senator, we've got a broad awareness on what's happening on kind of Privacy Act reforms. That's important to us to understand what's happening there, so we understand how some of those boundary issues may play out. The OAIC is also one of the regulatory agents with respect to the CDR for those kind of privacy and data protection elements. So we have a good relationship with them. But as I said at the a few questions ago, actually our focus is on the consent and operational enhancement rules on expanding CDR to the non-bank lending sector.
So the privacy concerns, is there a risk that the privacy concern considerations could further delay aspects of the CDR?
It's not affecting our current planning and delivering the commitment of the Assistant Treasurer. He did, in his speech that he made and his statements, he has identified some things, that kind of go to that issue. So one is, if we are to, when we get to the stage of bringing in actions and designating certain actions, making sure they themselves don't cause problems or conflict with other government policies. So, there are areas when you get to them, they may turn up, but that's not the current focus.
How would you characterise the representations that industry has made to the Treasury since the passage of the bill?
Do you have so industry's broad? I think the passage of the bill has been well received. It's been well received by many of the people we speak to.
But it would be fair to say also that they're waiting with anticipation.
I think, Senator, the Minister was very clear in his speech and the communications that it's not the immediate priority. So I think they're accepting. They're happy that the bill's being passed. We're also in a world in which some players in the CDR system are actually finding ways to use CDR to deliver actions. So people are finding other ways to use CDR to initiate actions. So that's one thing we're kind of really interested to understand. And the Minister's also kind of flagged his interest in experiments. The very first experiment that our standards body and chair did was around using the existing CDR framework along with some industry standards to allow for action initiation in respect of initiating a mortgage, for example.
And just to be clear, has the Treasury been consulting with the Attorney General's Department? Has the Treasury started consulting with the Attorney General's Department around these privacy considerations?
We've had discussions with the Attorney General's Department just about some of the issues we've faced. My area within Treasury is involved in some ways the central agency role oversighting the Privacy Act reform, so kind of been seeing both sides of that. But it's at a very general level. It's just like we have these differential regimes that has implications. And the ideal world in some ways would be to have a Reform Privacy Act that delivers the appropriate standards that could be applied across all sectors, including into the CDR space. In
summary, the Minister has now been presented with some matters on which to decide or release, and will again soon be presented with a second suite of matters to decide and release.
Yeah, that's a fair comment, Senator.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. So it's still in purgatory, but repenting for...
I think the days of penance are past, Senator.
Sorry?
The days of penance are past, and we're flat out doing what we have to do.
Great.
CDR.
Thanks very much, Mr. Kelly.
Great. Senator Bragg.
Thanks very much. Just with markets, I just want to fly through a few different issues, if that's okay. So, firstly, can I ask you, where are we up to with the quality of advice review? I think it's now 700 days since the review was given to the government. When will the second tranche be seen?
So Andre Moore, Assistant Secretary, Banking Review, Investment and Financial Advice Branch. We're in the legislation development phase right now. The Assistant Treasurer indicated that he wanted to progress the bill in this term of Parliament. We're continuing to work to those timeframes.
So what's the timetable?
Well, the next stage will be an exposure draft legislation.
Okay.
We're working on developing.
When's the exposure draft coming out?
Well, that ultimately will be a decision of the government and the minister. I don't have a time frame for that at the moment.
Okay, have you got a draft?
We don't have a complete draft. No, we're working on it.
You haven't got a draft yet. Okay, so exposure draft would have to happen pretty soon, wouldn't it, if you were going to meet this Parliament?
It would have to happen in the coming, period. Yeah, pretty.
Fantastic, clear as mud. What about? Have you been using non-disclosure agreements?
We have been using non-disclosure.
Okay, how many?
agreements. I'd have to take that on notice.
Okay, who are you consulting with in secret?
So we're consulting. We've consulted confidentially with the full spectrum of stakeholders that are heavily engaged in the development of this legislation.
With the super funds?
Yes.
Oh yeah, how many?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Now, with CBUS?
I'd have to take that on notice. I can't recall exactly.
Okay, they're pretty good at lobbying, I think. All right, so the position of the department is that you're trying to work to the minister's commitment of this, doing it in this Parliament.
Yeah, so as with all legislation, we work to the government's priorities, and
of course,
and that's exactly what.
And you've got a non-disclosure agreements, and you've got a bill coming soon, we hope. Okay, thank you for that. Now, can I keep on flying on quickly through these things? Retail payments. What's happening? Who's doing that? Retail payments, debit surcharging ban, and all this other business.
That's within.
Yep. How's it going?
Good, thanks.
So what's happening there? You've got a new big announcement from, I think, even the Prime Minister, was it, about you're going to ban debit surcharges?
That's right. Sally Etherington, Assistant Secretary of Payment System and Financial Innovation Branch. On the 15th of October, the Prime Minister made an announcement of an intention to ban debit card surcharges pending the RBA review.
Great. Now, the legislation before Parliament to give the RBA more payments powers, that would vest more capacity and authority in the RBA, wouldn't it, to determine payments policy in Australia?
Yes, but in this, not directly related to surcharging. They already have authority on surcharging.
That's right. So, effectively, you're not proposing to remove the sovereignty of the RBA. Sorry, maybe sovereignty is the wrong word. You're not proposing to strip the RBA of its capacity to regulate surcharging, are you?
The government's position is that they feel that the surcharging rules are not working properly.
Okay.
They have indicated that if the RBA they have indicated their preference to see the findings of the RBA review the RBA are undertaking. Should the RBA not want to act on surcharging or update the regime, they've announced a disposition or a willingness to get involved.
Okay. Has the government told the RBA that they're disappointed with how this has been handled?
That's not the position of the government.
Okay. Well, what is the position?
So we don't need to say that to the RBA.
Okay, you just want this to happen?
Yeah.
Okay. And
and the announcement was, I think, accompanied by the RBA's consultation paper, if I remember correctly.
So you want this to happen, so the Prime Minister of the country announces this particular announcement.
Along with some additional resourcing to the ACCC.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then who actually executes the change on this proposed ban? Is it still the RBA?
Well, I think...
Does anyone know?
So, Senator, that might depend on...
Was it just another one of these media releases which goes on to delivering nothing?
This may depend on the outcome of the RBA's review. There are a pathway where the RBA might be able to control this. There's also a pathway in which the government may wish to introduce legislation to ban debit card surcharges.
Okay, so you're basically saying either you do it or we'll do it.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that they're the options available depending on the outcome of the RBA's decision. Because the government is quite conscious that needs that advice, particularly to ensure that there's no adverse effects on small businesses.
Okay. So who was consulted on this matter before this announcement? Who was consulted?
The RBA was consulted.
Yep. Any actual private businesses, small businesses?
Not specifically before this announcement, but we have been consulting with a wide range of stakeholders on this issue for a long time.
Is there a risk that small business will absorb some of this cost?
Well, that's some of the issues that we need to work through.
But you've already announced it. The Prime Minister of the country announced this.
Yeah, and in the announcement, I think it makes it clear we want to ease costs for consumers without added costs for small business or unintended consequences for the broader economy.
Okay. What's the commencement date of this ban?
We are, I think in the media release, I'll tell you too, we are prepared to ban debit card surcharging from 1st of January 2026, subject to the consultation undertaken by the RBA and sufficient steps and safeguards to ensure both small business and consumers can benefit from lower costs.
Okay, so it's going to happen in about 18 months.
Well, yes, well, I think that would take into account the work that the RBA is doing.
But hasn't this been held out as cost of living relief?
Well, it will.
Pretty callous, isn't it?
No.
In 18 months.
That we're trying to work to bring down costs for consumers.
It's been proposed as cost of living relief now.
Well, I don't think anyone has said it's cost of living relief now, other than the money that we've given to the ACCC to tackle excessive charging right now. So that money has flowed to them, and I don't know if we'll get to them tonight. Okay. They're sitting out there waiting. But I'm
going as fast as I can. There's a lot of things that have been announced and not a lot of detail. So,
well, I've answered your questions. You asked me when. I've answered that.
Who did you consult?
You've asked me whether we're thinking about small business. I've answered that.
Who did you consult?
Well, I'm aware that the ACCC, the RBA...
Yeah, they're all government bodies. Any actual people?
Well,
or any...
this is the point. I mean, the RBA has a discussion paper out. So what, we're not allowed to... We've got to consult widely before we can say we want to lower the price of charges on your debit cards.
Can't think of any other time when the Prime Minister of the country's announced a payments reform due to start in a year and a half. You haven't even worked out how you're going to do it yet. Anyway, that's your answer.
We have been very clear in the release, Senator Bragg, so I think all of those criticisms are unfounded and unfair.
I thought you'd say that. Anyway, if that's your answer, fair enough. I'll go on to the next thing, Chair, if that's all right. Now, what's happening with the payment service provider licensing framework?
That's another piece of legislation that we are working on and we are hoping to introduce in this term of government.
So who's this going to actually apply to? This is not the crypto thing, this is something else.
No, this is for payment service providers.
Okay. So when's it going to happen, do you think?
We're working on the legislation now and hopeful to release an exposure draft in the coming months.
Have you got a draft bill?
Not a completed one.
Same as the other issue, not completed. What percentage complete is it?
It's in initial stages of being drafted.
Sounds like 20 or 30.
So our intention, Senator, is to have an exposure draft ready for release in the first half of 2025, so next year.
Okay, so how many people in Treasury are working on these payments issues?
Well, Mr. Kelly?
On the payments licensing reforms, there would be a team of 5 people. And it's quite a detailed piece of legislation, so it has taken a lot of time to work through all the policy specifications.
Is stable coins in this, or is that in our long-lost friend or crypto regulation?
So the stablecoins part will be progressed with the rest of the payments licensing, but is actually done by a different team, but they will be progressed together.
Okay. So how many people are working in markets at the moment?
In markets group?
Yeah.
Senator? I think we're about 270 people.
Okay. Feels like it's a bit slow going there, yeah? Would you say? Because a lot of projects Senator? Seem to go there to sort of die or not be progressed.
So, Senator, so we have constraints when it comes to the legislative agenda to have things on there, and things are outside our control. Within the group, though, we are also responsible for the things that you're aware of, whether it become the financial system, market conduct, corporations law, competition and consumer policy, the competition task force, CDR and a range of other things. And we prioritise those things that are important to the government of the day.
Feels like we're a long way away from getting the financial advice stuff, the crypto stuff, the payment stuff. Is the constraint here the Assistant Treasurer's office?
No.
It's not.
No.
I
know you like to besmirch him every opportunity you can.
He's going well.
He has a very large workload and a very high legislative agenda. Probably, I would think, next perhaps the attorney, the biggest legislative agenda.
Well, apparently,
and there's constraints, for
example,
example, in drafting resources and other things. And this tends to be the legislation, in my experience of these bills, are often contested and complex.
I know it's tough, but I mean, I read in the paper the only way stakeholders can get meetings with him is by going to a Labor Party fundraiser. So he seems to be a bit of a problem. Finally, I'm trying to go as fast as I can. But I should note that, you don't think it's a bit odd that the Prime Minister of the country is making these announcements on things which are clearly not concluded or in any state ready to show the public?
No, I don't think it's unusual. No, I think the Prime Minister is involved in almost every aspect of, I would think, across government. And
I think people look forward to the follow through on some of these things. So I just hope we don't have to have Groundhog Day at these next estimates hearings. We have to ask the same questions again, like I have today.
Okay.
I have one more round.
Final question.
I'm getting there. Yeah. The last one I was going to ask you about was. No, I think that might be it on markets.
Okay, thank you.
No, I have to. I just want to, if I may, Chair.
Senator Smith.
Thanks very much. There is the continuing saga in regards to Simply and PEXA and e-conveyancing in Australia. And rather than in our limited time sort of going through all of the various complexities around that, has the Treasury met with representatives of Simply to discuss their concerns?
I'll ask the team if they're familiar with that.
Yes, we have.
Thank you very much. Has the Treasury put their mind to a particular course of action that can be recommended to government to resolve this impasse?
Senator, this is an issue that is primarily an issue for the states.
Many competition issues are.
Certainly, and we anticipate that there may be interest from some of the states in progressing the issue through the vehicle of the National Competition Policy. But that's a matter that's currently under consideration.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. When we're thinking national competition policy, we have the issues paper process, which was a good read, but that is not going to resolve this particular issue or be a forum for resolution of this particular issue, given that we're going through a issues paper, consultation paper, negotiation with the states, etc., over a competition reform program that is expected to go for 10 years. So I'm assuming you don't mean that process.
No, I do mean that process.
Oh, you do mean that
so
process.
There's maybe 2 points I'd make on this one. The issue when it comes to e-conveyancing has been raised a number of times, as I understand it, through the Australian Registrar's National Conveyancing Council, and the view is that this is a matter that the states can take forward, particularly interoperability standards that New South Wales may be in a position to pursue. Where the national competition policy might become relevant is if one of the states want to take it forward as part of that. Now, that doesn't mean that we're waiting for a 10-year program and it comes at the end of that. The whole basis of the national competition policy is particular reforms can advance as they're ready and as quickly as they can. So much like mergers, has progressed quickly when there's the appetite to be
fair, strong consultation process.
Yep. Thank you.
So, are you offering up a pathway here that if the state regulatory body, so that the state's regulatory body was to refer or write to the National Competition Task Force, that might be a pathway to bring the disparate parties to a conversation around this?
Possibly. All states sit as part of the national competition policy. We'd expect it to come through one of the state treasuries as part of that process.
Right, okay. Has Treasury met with PEXA on the matter? Has the... Sorry, I'll let you finish.
I don't think... I certainly haven't met with PEXA, and I don't think the Competition Task Force has met with PEXA. I can't recall any meeting that we've had with PEXA. I'm being a bit careful because, Senator, you may be aware that I'm on secondment from the ACCC, and I had some engagement with them in a professional capacity at the ACCC.
Fair point, and I will, just for full transparency, ask similar questions to the ACCC. Mr Phillip, are you aware of Treasury officials having met with PEXA?
I'm personally not aware, but I can happily take that on notice.
Has the Treasurer met with PEXA or representatives of PEXA?
Not aware.
Again, we're not aware.
Has the Treasurer met with Simply?
I'm not aware, but you can take that on notice as well.
I might just finish with this comment that's contained in a Simply media statement, just as a way of encouraging sort of, continued due diligence on this matter. The media statement says, unfortunately, industry's consistent cries for help to the Treasurer and Minister Lee have fallen on deaf ears. But, Mr Phillip, I think you've provided what might be a suitable pathway for this particular issue to get some better traction. Great. Okay, thanks very much. Can I ask some quick questions here about supermarkets?
Sure.
Great. They will just be... Does anyone else have a line of questions?
So I'll go to Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair.
I understand that Senator Smith has some more questions, Senator Bragg has some more questions. For those waiting in the wings, we are 4 hours behind. We've been unable to make an agreement on time management. The committee will meet at the 8:35 p.m. break and attempt to provide some advice to those who are waiting. Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for staying with us. I was keen to ask some questions about the scams prevention framework. In terms of the government policy being brought forward, is your understanding that the intention is to pursue world's best practice when it comes to scams prevention?
So in relation to scams prevention, the government's committed to doing, I suppose, or trying to achieve two things. So one that it's trying to achieve is to, first of all, prevent scams from occurring in the first place. So it's consulted on legislation where there's a framework of principles-based regulation, as well as providing for specific measures that could be targeted towards specific sectors. And as a consequence of that, you would be expecting to see an uplift in the hardening of the approaches that that particular sectors are going to take towards preventing scams. And then another limb of that is, of course, providing opportunities for redress for people that are victims of scams.
But I take it we are aiming for sort of world's best practice here. We're not aiming for a mediocre scheme that does those things.
So yeah, in terms of what the government's looking for, it's looking to have an ambitious approach that generates a significant uplift in scams prevention in Australia.
And what work did you do comparing different approaches being implemented in other jurisdictions, and what did you find, if you can keep it short?
Certainly. So I have a colleague here who might be able to elaborate on the international comparisons on that front. But yes, we have been very cognizant of what's going on around the world, and also thinking about, well, given those international developments, what would be relevant for the Australian context. We're kind of fortunate in some respects that there have been approaches that have been taken internationally, and I think they might have had some ambition associated with them, and some of the unintended consequences have been able to be flushed out, and that's helped us learn from those situations, which positions, I think, Australia in a good spot to learn those lessons and come up with something that we think would be fit for purpose. But I'm happy to invite colleagues if they would like to add more to that.
Thank you, Senator. My name's Ms Shelley Davis. I'm the Director in the Scams Task Force. So during the process of considering and providing advice to the government on the scams prevention framework, we've had engagement with counterparts in the UK and with Singapore and with New Zealand in particular to understand the arrangements that they have been developing and putting in place in their countries. Thinking about the institutions available in each country and being able to bring that back to Australia to think about, with the arrangements we have here, what might be appropriate in the way that we give advice to the government about what could be developed here in Australia.
Thank you, that's really useful. Mr Dixon, you sort of touched on prevention. Clearly there's sort of punishment in here. The thing that I'm interested in, why reimbursement is missing from the draft legislation.
So I think perhaps there's a point of clarification. We actually do have redress as a central part of the legislation. Yes. Perhaps what's so obvious is, like, well, whereabouts in the legislation does that exist? Like, where did the opportunities for redress come from? So I'm happy to talk through.
Sure. I mean, I've had a look at it, sort of a 15 to 20 step process from what I've seen to get redress.
So it might not be that it's a 15 to 20 step process. I think what you might be observing is that there's multiple channels that you can go through if you want to pursue redress. So, for instance, one of those channels that you would have seen in the draft legislation is the internal dispute resolution mechanism. Then there's an external dispute resolution mechanism. But in addition to that, there's also the ability for a victim to actually seek redress through the court. In addition to that, the regulator itself can make a claim to a court on behalf of a victim. A victim could join a class action. There are several ways in which that redress could occur.
Which it just seems really complicated to me. If I get scammed, you kind of look at this sort of flow chart of the different options, and the easiest option, or the option that should be happening, is obviously going straight to your bank. And what we see there is a huge sort of asymmetry in access to information. They've got it all. You've got nothing. And what I'm hearing from scam victims is that the banks don't give you information because they're not obliged to. And so I'm interested to look at the FOI documents that were released recently from Treasury say that Treasury recommends, to quote, a mechanism to determine redress and reimbursement of funds for breaches by a bank under sector-specific code. Was this mechanism included in the government's draft framework?
Yeah, so just to clarify in relation to seeking redress, and I think you made a comment that perhaps it would be simpler if you could just go to a bank and just seek redress from a bank. So, well,
that's what people are trying to do, but they run into all sorts of hurdles.
And I think part of that appetite might come from the frequent media reporting that you might see where the bank, or there is a bank that is involved in part of the scam activity that's occurred. But there are really important parts of the economy that are also contributing to scam activity in Australia. While it's typical that a bank might be at the end of it, the vulnerabilities that exist in the scams ecosystem might not necessarily be originating in the bank. They actually might be originating in other sectors, such as in relation to digital platforms or telecommunications. And so what's really important is that there's a framework in place that tries to incentivise an uplift in capability and preventing scams from occurring across all of those sectors. So,
surely the way to do that, though, is to put them on the hook. So say the banks, as in the UK, up to a certain limit, exclusions for things that I think are very reasonable, banks on the hook. The bank then has to go and decide with Facebook or the telco that the scam comes through. How do you apportion this? Is it 50-50? And they're very good at actually doing this. They do it for all sorts of things. I'm concerned that it seems to me Treasury is recommending something like that, and yet the draft doesn't have that. So I'm interested.
So the draft certainly does contain...
Is what was recommended by Treasury actually in the draft?
Yes, so the draft bill definitely contains the ability for there to be...
That's different to a sort of reimbursement framework that we see in somewhere like the UK, though.
So if I could just finish. So just so we can make sure we're understood, the bill definitely does contain provisions that enable there to be redress in sector-specific ways. And so if that so one of those sectors, if designated, if that's the banking sector, there would be ability to set rules and create codes that talk about that. In relation to then, well, how is that different to the UK? Yes, it is different to the UK. And what we're looking to, what the government is looking to achieve is providing incentives that are not just in relation to the banking system. I don't think you could be, it's possible to be too confident that putting all of the onus on one sector of the economy would result in the incentives that you need to see across the other sectors of the economy that are creating vulnerabilities in the system. And so while there might be a sentiment that perhaps the banks would be in some position to negotiate to create those incentives on other parts of the economy, the legislation actually is trying to do that, and it's doing it by making sure that there are responsibilities across key sectors of the economy and not just an incentive on one part of the economy. And that means looking at, for example, as the government's explained, its intention to, for instance, designate digital platforms. And we know that digital platforms are a speedily growing vector of scams in the economy. And so it's actually really important that there are multiple points at which we are tackling the problem, not just one.
No, I don't disagree with that. I'm just concerned. What I hear from people in the community, from consumer groups, is that the UK's model is the way to go, where you put business on the hook. That then means if you're on the hook for something, you're obviously investing in all sorts of systems to detect scams early, to do all the things. And we've seen it at the banks; they're not even doing payee confirmation. It's an absolute joke if they have wiggle room, and we've seen it time and time again with banks putting their shareholders' profits ahead of customers.
So this bill does put obligations on the banking sector when the banking sector is designated as a sector, and it would put obligations on other sectors too. So by virtue of the fact that just because we're the bill is looking at other sectors doesn't mean that the banking sector is in some way exempt. So in addition to obligations on the banking sector, the government has the ability to put obligations on other sectors.
And so how much do you expect scam rates to be decreased by after this legislation?
So we haven't done specific modelling where we're able to look at a behavioural response. It's a matter for a much more sophisticated modelling capability than I think exists anyway. But
sure.
What we are able to do is examine, in terms of costs and benefits, what the level of scam activity is currently in the economy. And so we know that there are losses of around $2.7 billion in 2003 from scams. So actually it takes a very small amount of improvement on reduction in scam activity to generate very material benefits.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I think reducing scams is an important part of it, but I think reimbursement is also, in a cost of living crisis, you'd have to say reimbursement is a equally big part of it. And so how do you see that happening? From the figures I've seen, UK banks currently reimburse 67% of scam victims. Australian banks reimburse between 3 and 5%. It's hard to get the exact data. Are we going to bridge that divide, or do we just accept that Aussies are going to get caught up in with through AFCA or the courts or whatever else it might be?
So the figures that you're quoting are figures that trying to capture a past state, and the question I think that you're getting to is, well, what's the future state, and will the legislation be able to bridge the gap that you're seeking to close? Yeah. And looking at the legislation, it's covering 6 general principles that are requirements upon designated sectors. There's requirements on governance.
Sure.
In terms of,
I'm just worried we're going to run out of time. I'm just interested. Have you looked elsewhere that's done this and gone, okay, well, their reimbursement rate went from 35% to 20%. I guess we've got the UK to look at and say, if we did this, we could probably expect that we would head in that direction. Where are we heading with this sort of framework approach?
The key objective is in the bill to prevent the scams from occurring in the first place.
Yes.
So that you're not in a position where you've got a consumer that requires reimbursement.
I take that point, but people are going to get scammed.
Yeah, I understand that, and and that's why there is the other limbs to the bill that enable redress to occur.
But my concern is, and talking to consumer groups, they're really hard to navigate. People don't have time to be going and finding a lawyer to get their $450 back that they got scammed on. Buying something online.
And there's nothing in that bill that says the consumer would be required to find a lawyer. For example, that's the
advice I'm being given. It's very hard to navigate this.
I can give you testimony that says that there's an aspect of the bill, in particular the external dispute resolution process. That's a free service that would be made available to consumers.
Who's that by?
So the government has expressed an intention that would be AFCA, and that by making that AFCA, that gives you the ability to have one external dispute resolution process that covers all of the sectors. So it wouldn't just cover, for instance, if banking was
one-stop shop.
One-stop shop, which is, I think, exactly what consumer groups have been saying that they'd be looking for.
And thank you, Chair. Just on AFCA, in what percentage of cases where complaints have been put to AFCA, has AFCA found in favour of the consumer versus found in favour of the bank? Do you have that data on you?
I don't have that right in front of me, but I can take that on notice if that's okay.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. So for time management, the committee has now met and agreed that we still have questions, some questions for markets and questions for revenue and related tax groups. The committee's agreed to spill over APRA onwards in the program, so APRA and all agencies after APRA. So we release tonight, APRA, the ACCC, Housing Australia, the ABS, the Productivity Commission and as BFIO, on the basis that the committee has agreed to a spillover. To those of you who have been waiting patiently, we thank you for your patience, and you go with our thanks this evening.
We're happy to let AUSParliamentLive be discharged completely.
Released entirely. I think we can deal with that later.
Okay.
Can I just say this happens quite a bit at this committee. Is there any better way to organise the program that doesn't fly in a lot of these bodies from Melbourne and Sydney and have them sitting here all afternoon only to be released at 7:45 in the evening? Like, just a matter for the committee to consider. I just think there has to be a more professional and better way to deal with people who are taking time out to provide accountability to the Senate. And this is probably, in my time, this has happened almost every time I've appeared, that we've sent away people who have travelled to be here and who have waited since lunchtime or abouts, because they come early in case they're called on early to appear.
Thank you, Minister. For the Markets Group, Senator Smith.
Great, thank you very much. Just some questions around supermarket initiatives. Can I get an update on when the mandated food and grocery code is expected to be operational?
Thank you, Senator. Tony McDonald, Assistant Secretary, Competition and Digital Platforms Branch. We're currently working on the remaking of the code. We've had an exposure draft of the code released, received a number of submissions and are working through those at the moment. We expect the date of effect of the new remade code to be 1 April next year, which is the time when the current code lapses or expires.
Thank you very much. Can you give me an update on when the anonymous complaints mechanism is expected to be operational?
So the part of why we're working to remake the code and have that in place ahead of the operational date of the code is to allow the code to be fully operational by 1 April next year. That's what we're working towards.
So is that 1 week prior to the 1st of April? Is it a month prior to the 1st of April that you expect the anonymous complaints mechanism to be in place?
Expect the complaints mechanism to be in place when the code is operational.
Great, thanks very much. Can you provide an update in terms of when you expect the code supervisor, which was recommendation 6 of the Emerson Review, to be operational?
We're working on the code. So the code supervisor role commences when the new code is operational. So we're working towards that being position being filled and effective from the date of effect of the new code.
And then finally, in regards to the unit pricing code and the consultation process around that, can you give us an update in terms of work that is underway in regards to that?
Senator, that's my area. So updated you the other day at the Cost of Living Committee.
Oh, that was, to be fair, that was like the 11th of October, so that was 4 weeks away.
So in relation to, so there's 3 elements to the unit pricing code that were part of the government's decision. One was around the introduction of penalties for non-compliance with the code, and that work is being progressed at the moment. So we've already started taking that forward, and that will obviously, subject to drafting resources, as we often have with these things, is something we're prioritising to progress. In relation to the consultation that was mentioned, and we are working on the basis that we would kick that consultation process off in the first quarter of next year. And a key part of that, I guess, input into that will be the final report from the ACCC Supermarket Inquiry, which, as you know, have looked at the unit pricing code and certainly on the interim report had information around around opportunities to enhance the unit pricing code, and certainly we want to be informed by that. But that's really when the consultation process will really formally kick off in the first quarter of next year.
So the unit pricing code reform not expected to be in place and operational before 1 April 2025?
No, you wouldn't think that would be in place by that time, given that.
Thanks very much.
Senator Bragg.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to ask Market Script about one more thing. Do you know about the compensation scheme of last resort?
We do.
Yeah, very interesting idea, isn't it? Very interesting. Now, how's it going down there at the CSLR?
So I'll ask my colleagues to come in here. CSLR has been operational, is it for
since April this year.
Yep.
And who's running it?
So there is a scheme operator.
Who's that?
Do you know the names?
So Lauren Hogan, Acting Assistant Secretary of Regulators and Capital Markets Branch. So the CSLR operator is operated by a company called CSLR Limited.
Does any natural person work there?
Yes, so the CEO is David Berry.
Okay, and who's he?
The CEO.
Who appointed him? These are not trick questions.
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, who's David Berry? Who appointed him?
So the government. So the minister appointed. The government appointed the chair of the CSLR.
Who appointed him?
The minister appointed the chair of the CSLR operator.
Who's the chair?
So Joanne Block, who was appointed on 1st of February 2024.
Who appointed Joanne Block?
The government appointed.
Who?
So that was the minister who appointed Ms Block.
Minister?
I would expect it would be the Assistant Treasurer.
Okay. Minister Jones?
Correct.
Okay. He's appointed Ms Block, and the board or the chair has appointed the CEO?
I expect that would have been the case, but can take that on notice.
All right. So how much money is in this fund?
So there has been a number of levies that have...
your nameplate there.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
So there's been a number of levies that have been paid. The first levy was paid by the 10 largest banking and general life insurance groups, and that was $241 million. The second, and that's the pre-CSLR backlog. The first levy period was paid by the Commonwealth, and that was $4.8 million. And then the second levy has been paid by industry, and that was a total of $24.1 million. That was paid in October this year.
How much?
$24.1 million.
How much in total was sitting in this fund?
So around $290 million has been levied so far.
So does the organisation report to Treasury, or does it report to... Who does it report to? Where does it sit? Does it work, the people working your building in Treasury in Canberra?
So CSLR operator is independent, but Treasury engages closely with the CSLR operator.
Right. So where are they based?
They are based physically. They're based in Melbourne.
They're in Melbourne. Okay. So I think in one of your papers you estimated, Treasury this is, estimated the admin costs will be $3.7 million. But according to the record for financial year 25, the CSLR is estimating an admin cost of $6.4 million. So vastly higher admin costs. So what is it spending the money on?
We'd have to take the specifics on notice, but generally they're the ones operating the scheme, so that includes receiving the complaints that come through from AFCA, assessing them and making the payments.
Right. Apparently last week the CSLR posted a job ad for a communications partner. So what's that job?
That would be a matter for the CSLR operator.
Okay, well, do we have CSLR coming? No. Okay. So what sort of agency is CSLR?
So they're not a government agency, they're a corporate entity.
It's a corporate entity, so is it established under legislation? Mm-hmm. Okay, so is it a Commonwealth corporation? What is it?
No, I believe it's a corporate entity that is appointed by the government as the operator of the CSLR.
Okay. Is it undertaking a statutory function? Is operating the scheme as set out in the legislation. I'm wondering whether it's undertaking a statutory function on behalf of the public, taxpayers.
Yes.
It is, isn't it?
It's operating a scheme for the government.
It is, okay. So how are we supposed to ask them questions if you're not going to answer questions on their behalf?
Well, I imagine you could call them.
They could be, I assume they could be called to the committee.
Okay. I want to encourage more people to sit in that room and then get sent home despite the chair's best efforts to keep everyone on track, but
this is the truncated program that we have. We're doing our best to get through it. So
are you?
Okay, well, clearly I am. I'm actually quite efficient in my questions and generally your answers are quite efficient as well. So, but we can't ask you these questions, clearly.
We're happy to take.
You don't know about the admin costs of this scheme, is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't have that information before me.
Nor do we, Senator. We'd be very happy to take that on notice and respond.
So can they do that?
They can, but if it assists you, I think ASIC is the oversight.
Yeah, if you can take those questions on notice about why they're spending so much money on administration and what this communications partner job is going to do, that'd be much appreciated. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, that concludes the questions that we have for Treasury Markets Group. Thank you very much for answering them. You go with our thanks. I call Department of Treasury Revenue Group ATO TPB ACNC and we'll take a brief suspension while they arrive. The committee resumes and we welcome Revenue Group, ATO, Tax Practitioners Board and the ACNC. Thank you, Ms Brown and team, for being with us, and Commissioner Heffernan. And we are aware that Commissioner Woodward is she joining remotely, or she's an apology, and we have other staff. Yes, and we have other staff. We have received your opening statement, Commissioner Heffernan. Are you willing at this stage to table it, or would you like to make some opening remarks?
I would like to make some opening remarks.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. It's always a privilege to appear before this committee with my executive team, including newly appointed Second Commissioner, Mr Allen, and Ms Fish is joining online due to a bout of COVID. Mr Allen's appointment was announced on the 25th of October. He leads our frontline operations group and brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the role. I'm very pleased, as is the government, to have Mr Allen in this critical role. So I'd like to make some brief comments on three areas that might be interesting to the committee. Firstly, I'd like to update the community on progress in collecting outstanding debt. Through our efforts this year, we've seen a slowing in debt growth, but collectible debt remains high at around $50 billion. The task ahead of us is substantial, and we can't ignore our obligations under the law as Australia's principal tax collector. In many cases, if a business can't pay what it owes to the government, other creditors are often also going unpaid. The ATO's role is an important one because when businesses are prompted to take action sooner, they're better able to get back on track. Doing our job protects viable businesses who rely on prompt payment from their business customers. This also protects employees for whom the consequence of unpaid superannuation can have a lifetime effect. My expectation is that we, the ATO, act with empathy and respect. If a taxpayer cannot meet their tax obligations, we encourage them to talk to their registered tax professional or contact us directly to understand the support that may be available to them. This could include payment arrangements or, in some instances, remission of general interest charges. In many cases, people can put payment plans in place through our online services. I want to emphasise this message to any taxpayers who may be experiencing vulnerability. The ATO can and will work with you to find a way forward, so please contact us. Ultimately, we serve the community and the government of the day, and our approaches must meet community and government expectations and standards. Secondly, I'd like to update the committee on our approach where a taxpayer makes a voluntary disclosure. I consider this important given recent reporting in relation to voluntary disclosures of prior tax fraud or evasion and the misunderstanding of confusing voluntary disclosures on one hand with settlements. Where a taxpayer incorrectly reports in a prior year return, penalties do apply. But the base level of penalty depends on the culpability of the mistake. For example, evasion can trigger a 75% penalty of the tax shortfall, but a lack of reasonable care, only 25%. When a taxpayer comes forward with voluntary disclosure to correct what they have previously reported to us, and they do so before we notify them of our intention to conduct an examination of their tax affairs, Section 284.225 of Schedule 1 to the Tax Administration Act automatically applies an 80% remission of the penalties that would otherwise apply. This occurs irrespective of whether the prior year error was a simple mistake or deliberate evasion. The law is clear on this. The substance of this provision was inserted into the tax law in 1992 as part of the original self-assessment provisions and has not been substantially altered since then. The Parliament has set this deliberate mechanism to encourage taxpayers to correct their past reporting of their own accord. Without this pathway in place, taxpayers will be far less likely to come forward and make corrections. This is important because the success of Australia's self-assessment system relies on the vast majority of taxpayers doing the right thing and making corrections when required. Importantly, taxpayers who receive a reduction in penalties due to voluntary disclosures do not find themselves better off than if they were compliant from the beginning. These taxpayers are still required to pay 100% of the tax that is owed, with interest and the reduced penalties. Our most recent annual report shows that in the last financial year, around $1.3 billion was raised as a result of voluntary disclosures, including around $700 million from large businesses, which shows the importance of this approach. And thirdly, Within Australia's tax system, there are a number of features that help to ensure those with the most capacity to pay meet their obligations, and we know that targeted system transparency is a motivating factor, particularly for some of our largest taxpayers. Last week, we released the 10th Annual Corporate Tax Transparency Report, which is a legislated exception to taxpayer confidentiality. Pleasingly, it shows the ATO received $100 billion in income tax from large corporates, and of that, $97.9 billion was paid at lodgement and the remainder collected through our compliance activities. This is the highest since corporate tax transparency reporting began, a testament to the Tax Avoidance Task Force, which helped secure more than $33.2 billion in additional tax revenue from multinational enterprises, large public and private businesses since establishment in 2016. Back in June, in my first appearance before the Committee's Commission of Taxation, I said I was optimistic about the opportunities for the ATO to build on existing work and deliver for the Australian community and government. Having spent more time in the role, I'm now even more confident about what the ATO can achieve as an entity, as a group of dedicated public servants. Thank you, and we look forward to assisting the committee this evening.
Thank you, Mr Hefferon, and the committee tables your opening statement and that of Ms Woodward as well. If there are no other opening remarks, we'll proceed straight to questions, and I'll go to Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much, Chair. Questions, if I can, first to the TPB. Mr De Cure, I understand you're here. We just had a question about whether Mr O'Neill might also be here. Is he? Oh, great. Okay. We just couldn't spot him. Senator Pocock was asking. Thank you. Would you be able to give a quick update without compromising in any way the current investigation into PWC, its current and former employees?
Thank you, Senator. As we discussed at a previous appearance, at that stage there were 9 ongoing investigations. 4 of those investigations have been finalised with the decision to take no further action in those 4 cases. There are 5 still ongoing investigations, and to preserve the procedural fairness of those investigations, I'd like to say no more.
Okay, thank you. And we do look forward with interest to your findings. Could I ask if you're aware of the documents published on Friday last as part of the Parliamentary Joint Committee inquiry into ethics and professional accountability into the audit and consulting sector? In particular, the supervised remediation correspondence between PWC International and PWC Australia.
I'm aware of the matters you referred to, and I've been obviously seen the press, but no specific awareness other than that, Senator.
Okay. Can I therefore table before this committee documents that are already in the public place? The remediation letters. There are multiple copies here if people need to refer to them. What is your understanding of what's embedded in those documents, Mr De Cure?
Only what I've read in the press, Senator. So
okay.
I really would prefer not to discuss in any detail matters relating to Pricewaterhouse, because we have to maintain the procedural fairness of those investigations.
I acknowledge and accept that, but this is a matter these are documents that are already in the public place that are about the intersection between PWC Australia and PWC Global. Yep. Not just the tax matter, but other matters that are referenced in this in terms of the behaviour of the entity itself. Can I draw your attention to item 8 of the correspondence, which I hope might come before you shortly. On page 8, and it states that the firm, brackets PwC Australia, shall not provide to any regulator or other governmental or legal authority any formal, significant or substantive submissions or responses, whether oral or written, regarding any of the topics until the network representative and I, that being Global General Counsel Diana Weiss, have reviewed and approved the materials. So in essence saying, from the firm in the US, they cannot communicate with any entity, including regulatory agencies, without checking with their international counsel. Does that notionally provide any concerns for you about PWC International and its influence over the PWC Australia interactions with your body?
Senator, I understand this to be a matter that relates to the contractual arrangements between PwC Global and its Australian representative firm. I understand under the circumstances why they might want to conduct their relationship that way from the perspective of PwC International. I understand why they might want to conduct their relationship that way. Other than that, I think it would be inappropriate for me to express an opinion in the current circumstances.
Could I ask you to take it on notice and perhaps provide us with what you think might be appropriate on further consideration, Mr de Cure?
Will do.
Thank you. And perhaps that's what might happen with the next question as well that I have here. The remediation letter, and there are 3 here in this set of documents, threatened the expulsion of PW Australia from the global firm if the terms of the remediation were not complied with. And that means that if PwC were to provide any evidence to the TPB or the ATO, not to mention the AFP or the Parliament through the Senate inquiries or any other inquiries that we might have, without the approval of PwC International, they would be subject to expulsion from the global firm, which is a pretty significant consequence in anybody's book. Do you see this as an attempt by PwC International to intimidate their own firm in Australia as witnesses to your body and to this Parliament from engaging in relevant investigations?
I'd prefer not to express an opinion on that, Senator.
Can I just observe that the committee's report is imminent, and this whole matter, I think, is a very important case study. I hope that the documents that the Senate has been able to extricate from PwC provide you with some useful opportunities to consider how they've interacted with you, because certainly PwC have provided consistently a very, very tardy, delayed response to any questions that we've had from the Senate. And in these documents you will see references to the way in which their publication strategy, their media management strategy, appears to have been prioritised above a timely response to the inquiries of the Senate. And I hope that that's not how they've interacted with the TPB or the AFP, but it has been consistently the experience of senators both in the F&PO committee and in the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services. So I hope that these letters provide you with some further insight into the cultural practices that seem to be manifestly obvious to us as inquirers into what's gone on behind the scenes at PwC.
Thank you, Senator. We'll make sure that these letters are reviewed in full.
I've got other questions, but I'll share the call.
Thank you. Senator Bragg. We'll go in 10-minute blocks. Senator Bragg.
Thanks. I have some questions about tax policy to Treasury. Ms Brown, how are you?
Good, thank you, Senator.
That's good. What date was advice on negative gearing capital gains tax changes requested by the Treasurer?
Diane Brown, Deputy Secretary, Revenue Group. Senator, we provide advice on negative gearing, all aspects of the operating tax system on a regular basis and on an ongoing basis.
Okay, so there hasn't been any request for advice?
As I said, we provide advice on an ongoing basis. I think indicating whether we have or haven't been tasked or being any more specific actually would compromise our ability to provide.
Sorry, I can't...
being any more specific than saying what I've said would probably compromise our ability to have a constructive relationship with government.
No, I understand that. So has there been any advice presented, finalised and presented to the Treasurer on these matters?
Sorry, Senator?
Has there been any advice finalised and presented to the Treasurer about these issues?
I think the Treasurer has said he's not expecting any big advice, we just provide advice on an ongoing basis around the operation of all aspects of the tax system.
Okay. So there hasn't been any particular request on these issues?
So, as I said, it's very hard to be specific about whether or not we've been tasked, because I think we've had this discussion before at other hearings. It'll lead to a game of what are you working on, what aren't you working on, ruling in, ruling out.
Yeah. Now, I'm only asking you because I think the Prime Minister and the Treasurer have said publicly that there's been some specific new advice on these issues in relation to negative gearing in CGT. So that's why I thought it was a reasonable question to ask you.
I think what the Treasurer has said is that it would be unusual if Treasurers or governments weren't getting advice on all matters of the tax system. And so that's, part of him doing his job.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't think it's an unreasonable line of questioning. I'm just trying to get to
and I'm just telling you that it's a matter of, I think there's been a view by some that there's a single piece of advice, and what I'm trying to say to you is that it's a matter, and what Ms Brown has said is it's essentially an ongoing role.
Yeah, I get that. Of course.
Between the Treasury and Treasurer.
Of course, well, I'd be worried. If it wasn't. So, the Treasurer has said publicly, though, Minister, which might be helpful for all purposes here. He said recently, quote, "We haven't been convinced that would have that being changes, I imagine, would have positive consequences for supply," end quote. So I'm just wondering if that's a reflection of what Treasury's advice is. I assume it must be. And I'm seeking some...
Yeah, I've got that quote. I think it's primarily a supply challenge. We've made that clear in a lot of different ways. And one of the reasons why we're not going down the path of changing the negative gearing arrangements, abolishing negative gearing or abolishing the capital gains tax discount is because we haven't been convinced that that would have a positive consequences for supply.
I think and I would agree with that. So I'm asking Treasury whether that's based on their advice.
Senator, there's an FOI that was released on the 1st of November.
I haven't seen that, sorry.
Yep, FOI 3751. In there, advice was in accordance with FOI laws released, and that advice says there are a number of tax settings that affect demand for and supply of housing. However, there are a range of other factors that have a more significant effect on the housing market than tax, such as the planning and zoning system, construction sector capacity and interest rates. I think that's consistent with what the Treasurer has said.
Okay. So is this matter now considered to be resolved by Treasury?
The government has announced it's not making any changes to negative gearing.
But you would expect the Treasury to continue to brief the Treasurer on matters around the operation of the tax system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so that advice, so you're referring to advice in an FOI?
Yes.
Right. That you provided to a citizen?
Yes, all our FOIs are released publicly. I think in response to a journalist. It's given to the journalist, and then all of the FOIs are disclosed on a disclosure log on the Treasury website. So it is publicly available to everybody.
Okay. So as far as you're concerned, that matter has been concluded for the short term. I was just confused that on one hand you're saying you can't go into advice, then on the other hand you can say this is the advice. So
only because it's on the public record, Senator.
Okay, so because it's come out through an FOI, you're happy to talk about it?
I read out what was on the document that was released publicly.
Okay, I'm just trying to work out what the standard is in the Treasury at the moment, because clearly we had a discussion earlier, you weren't here, Ms Brown, but you may have seen it or maybe you had other things to do, but there was a...
No, everyone's just been waiting in that room.
Not sure people are doing.
For a committee that's very focused on productivity, there wasn't a lot of productivity happening inside of the building.
Look, I don't like to make assumptions about what other people might be doing. It's safer that way. So there was a discussion, Ms Brown, about the quality of a public interest immunity claim that was made by the Treasurer. Effectively, the Information Commissioner found as part of a separate process that perhaps wasn't commercial in confidence. So I guess I'm just wondering what sort of standard we're working on here in terms of how Treasury is going to be engaging with this committee and more broadly, because it seems to me that if information is exposed by a journalist or by the Information Commission, then you talk about it, but otherwise it's all very secretive.
Well, I think it's a pretty standard practice, as far as I've been in the Senate, that matters, you can ask about whether advice was provided, whatever, but going to the contents of that advice and what the advice specifically was has not been something that's been, open to the scrutiny of the committee.
Okay.
I think that's how it's operated. But obviously, if there's been an FOI and material has been found to, should be released under the requirements of the FOI Act, then that information is public.
So the FOI advice is dated 6 September, is it?
The QTB that you're referring to, QB 24 000030, is dated the 6th of September, yes.
Okay, and so you're confident that when the Treasurer made those statements about changes to negative gearing and CGT being bad for supply, bad for housing generally, that it's linked in part to this advice?
You'd have to, I think you're asking me to read the Treasurer's mind. It is consistent with what the Treasurer said, but I wouldn't presume to be able to read his mind.
Well, is that something that you can take on notice as the Minister representing?
So you want me to take on notice?
Well, I just want to know whether that statement is based on Treasury advice. I don't think it's a...
Well, it would be
a nasty question or anything.
It would be informed by advice from Treasury and I presume others, for example, in the housing sector and other stakeholders. Like, of course, it would be informed by advice from others.
So you happy to? So is that your answer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when the PM said that negative gearing questions were not terribly clever to Ms Carvelis on the ABC on 19 September, he was already in receipt of that advice, wasn't he, from Treasury?
So we give advice to the government, as I said, on an ongoing basis, and there could be various reasons for which that advice is provided. I think the Treasurer has said he gets advice on negative gearing annually in relation to the Tax Expenditure Insight Statement. We will provide meeting briefs that would include commentary on what people have said, and similarly we provide these type of briefs which often reflect information that will help the Treasurer to address questions that people are likely to answer.
What about the Prime Minister? Certainly. Do you provide advice to the Prime Minister, and you do it on a regular basis?
His department provides him his advice. The Treasurer may have provided our advice to the Prime Minister, but I don't ordinarily...
You haven't provided it to him directly. Has Treasury provided this advice to the Prime Minister or his department directly?
So we don't ordinarily deal directly with the Prime Minister.
So that wasn't my question.
Well, I think it was. It was Treasury does not provide advice to the Prime Minister.
So on this occasion, it didn't happen.
Well, it doesn't normally happen. Treasury provides advice.
It did happen this time.
Treasury provides advice to the Treasurer. PM&C provide advice to the PM. That's how it works.
So it didn't happen this time.
What didn't happen this time?
I'm wondering whether this negative gearing and CGT advice was given directly from the Treasury to the Prime Minister or his department.
So the Treasury hasn't provided any advice to the Prime Minister.
Or his department.
We probably had... Well, I don't think we advise his department.
So you didn't provide it to the department?
Provide what?
The negative gearing and CGT?
There is information sharing between departments
This is
as
as
a
clear as
routine.
mud. I'm just trying to get a straight answer.
Well, we're trying to give you the straight answer.
Okay.
Like, it just seems to me that you don't understand how the administrative orders operate. Like, Treasury briefs the Treasurer, PM&C brief the Prime Minister. There might be information exchange between the Treasury and PM&C on certain matters, and then that feeds into advice the Prime Minister
Sounds like it was
gets.
given to the Prime Minister's department.
Okay.
I don't know what you're talking
I'm
about.
just sharing the call
It's getting
in
madder and
10-minute
madder.
blocks, and I'm going to Senator Barbara Pocock.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for being here yet again. I want to go to the question of PWC, and I'd like to ask questions about the way that ATO dealt with PWC. And Mr Hirshhorn, my questions are probably going to be ones that I'll direct to you. And I want to table 3 documents that are the basis of my questions, and I'm pretty sure you will be familiar with them, Mr Hirshhorn. The first is your answer to my question on notice number 94, where you detailed your conversation with Mr Luke Sayers, who was, of course, ex-CEO of PwC at the time of the confidentiality breaches, on August 2019, where you read out the details of internal emails. I'm sure that meeting is imprinted on your brain, documenting the breaches which you detailed to him. So that's Quan 94. It'll be passed to you shortly, I hope. I bought a few copies. The second document is Mr Sayers' answer to my question on notice number 181, where he repeats his evidence that he knew nothing of breaches of confidentiality in PwC's tax business until 2023. And the third one is Ms Meredith Beattie's, who was General Counsel to PwC through the years of the confidentiality breaches, Quan 190, which is her file note, contemporaneous file note, of her conversation with Mr Sayers following your second memorable meeting with him in February 2020. So if I can go to those, are you familiar with the 3 of them?
Yes. This probably is imprinted on Mr Hirshhorn's mind, but
I think it
just
is.
in case, having the documents in front might be handy. Thank you.
Just a reminder for those who are following along, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, but it's important. In the Quan 94, your first of 2 significant meetings with Mr Sayers, you list point by point concerns about inappropriate use of professional legal privilege, promoter penalty activity, assisting clients to prepare responses that included false and misleading information, breaching confidential Treasury consultation and consultation information and commercialising it, subversion of foreign investment review board processes which are under process of examination at present, poor attitudes within PwC to the ATO and other regulators, the failure within PwC to call out poor behaviours and practices, and to offshore offences of interest to other regulators. As evidence of these concerns, you read out a select number of emails. Have I described that appropriately?
That is correct.
That's correct. Let's go then to item 2. This is Mr Sayers' answer just not so long ago to my Quan 181, where he reconfirms he knew nothing of breaches of confidentiality agreements in PwC's tax business till 2023. Have you read Mr Sayers' reply to my question, Mr Hirshhorn?
Yes, I have, Senator.
Thank you. To summarise, he says he stands by his statements that he knew nothing of confidentiality breaches until 2023, and of course he left PwC in 2020. He also says that rather than directly name what the ATO thought PwC was doing wrongly, that is committing a criminal offence, and we're now learning a series of criminal offences that are under investigation by the AFP as we sit here, by improperly passing on information. And he says you, quote, spread breadcrumbs, a memorable phrase, like little clues, to hint at a confidentiality problem without ever being direct, which may explain, Mr Sayers says, why I don't recollect. He also suggests that the ATO's clues have changed over time and that the ATO did not formally give notice to PwC prior to his departure. What's your... So before I go to that, let's go then to the third document, which is Miss Beattie's file note of her conversation with Mr Sayers after his 1.5-hour meeting with you on the 26th of February, in which you were, in her note, words, aggravated, and canvassed in quite some detail the ATO's concerns with PWC, its misuse of professional legal privilege, hindering of processes, failure of competence in ethics and culture, a long list of serious transgressions for which there are criminal penalties. Mr Hirshhorn, you said, I think you indicated you have read, or have you read Ms Beattie's note?
I have read Ms Beattie's note.
You've read it. What do you make of it, and do you agree with her account?
So, Senator, is a file note of her discussion debriefing from a conversation I think, relatively recently had with Mr Sayers. It is fair to say when I read that note, I do recognise a lot of the meeting that I had with Mr Sayers.
So do you see it as an accurate rendition of your memory of that meeting?
Yes, to the extent that... and again, Senator, I just say it is... even though it was a very memorable meeting, it is a few years back, but it is fair to say that what is in that note basically aligns with my memory of those parts of the meeting.
And for Ms Beattie to construct such a note and to take the care to file it and retain it, it suggests that Mr Sayers was able to provide to her immediately after the meeting considerable detail about what was said at the meeting, and yet in his evidence on several occasions now, including in his written response to a question on notice, he's claimed and reclaimed to have no memory of these issues being discussed, or more accurately, to be restating and restating that he did not have knowledge of the confidentiality issues that you were raising with him.
Yes, so Senator, I obviously have paid attention to the testimony surrounding these meetings. I think it's, I'd say around the second meeting, the note of Ms Beattie, as I've said, it does align with my recollection of that meeting. Around the first meeting and the discussion of the confidentiality breach, I would refer to my contemporaneous file note, but also I'd refer, as I have in the past, to PWC's fact report, which shows that the information about a commercialisation of a confidentiality breach was brought back to the Governance Board following that meeting, and that if they were breadcrumbs, they were breadcrumbs which led directly to Mr Collins, because the investigation was done by the Governance Board of Mr Collins. So,
yes, it's a powerful breadcrumb to make it through those processes.
Well, it was a very direct path of breadcrumbs if they were breadcrumbs.
Perhaps a loaf of bread. How do you account? Here we have two accounts which go in one direction and another account that goes in another. How do you account for the different recollections of these meetings by you and Ms Beattie on the one hand and Mr Sayers on the other?
Well, Senator, I would just say that I've had the benefit of contemporaneous records, as has Ms Beattie, and they align with my recollection of those meetings.
So you believe Ms Beattie's notes are a true rendition, your memory and your own notes are also in that same line of argument and reinforce each other, and yet we have a different view rendered over and over again by Mr Sayers. Is Mr Sayers being truthful in your view?
So I'm not here to defend Mr Sayers. I would say that the meetings are a few years back. I would say that I would suspect he does not have access to any contemporaneous notes. I think his testimony has identified, two of the important things which were discussed, which was professional privilege breaches and also promoter penalty investigations. Look, that's all I can say. We have contemporaneous records and recollections, but I think people's memories can honestly fail.
Last question.
I want to come to the ATO in particular, its stance and practices in relation, so leaving beside that issue, in relation to potential criminal matters. it seems to me, both from your own account of your meetings with Mr Sayers and from Ms Beattie's notes, that you were trying to warn or making some effort to warn PWC to get the house in order because the ATO was aware of the possibility of serious criminal offences by PWC. Was it your intention to try and help PWC or to assist PWC to avoid possible penalties in relation to the behaviours you were concerned about?
So, Senator, no is the short answer. If you'll recall a previous question on notice where we provided quite a detailed timeframe, at the stage of these meetings with Mr Sayers, we had previously referred the matter to the Federal Police, who had, in a position had been taken that there would not be, criminal matters would not be pursued. So from my perspective at the time of these meetings, there were no criminal prospects, no prospects of a criminal matter being pursued. In that context, I was in a position where I was absolutely seeking to influence the behaviour of PWC, put their governance structure on notice that inappropriate behaviour was happening in their practice. My intent was certainly not to somehow assist them in relation to criminal matters.
I don't really want to go back and explore the events in 2017-18 where the initial reference was made, but it is the case that only limited material was given to the AFP. It took some months for you. You had meetings. It took 4 months for the ATO to provide some documentation. AFP within 24 hours said not a case here, and yet here we are 5 years later in a very complex investigation, made more complex by that 5-year lag. But I digress. Can I finish this because it's complex and I want to...
No.
Okay, I'll come back.
But we will come back to you. The committee has a scheduled break which we will take and resume at 8:45.
movers, like on unlimited.
The committee resumes and we go to Senator Canavan.
Thank you. I'll be very quick. Thank you, Chair. Look, I've just had a matter raised with me by a constituent. They are a small business who, during COVID, did get behind on their superannuation payments. This is a matter for the ATO. ATO, I don't know if you're at the table or not, but okay, great. Look, they have accepted they have to make amends and happy to pay interest as well. That's been done. But they have also been given a huge fine, like a very, very large fine. And while I realise I can't prosecute that matter here, I just wanted to, on their behalf, ask, is there any degree of flexibility or acceptance of the difficulties of that COVID period and a willingness to consider some relief for a business in distress around those matters?
Yeah, Senator, can I assure the committee, assure your constituent that we're very alert to the difficulties that people faced and the difficulties a number of people are still facing. And as I've mentioned in my opening statement, which you wouldn't have heard, but in that where people have difficulties, please contact us. And contact us through the registered tax agent, contact us directly. We understand there are challenges and want to help how we can. I would say there are some limitations imposed on us. Our discretions are not limitless. On occasion, the law compels us to go down a particular path, but to the extent there is some flexibility and we can utilise the discretion where people are having difficulty, particularly when they've shown goodwill in trying to rectify circumstances, we will certainly take it into account.
All right. I think he's under the impression he might have to go through his registered tax agent. It sounds like it might be a quite complex process, but he can contact you directly.
He can contact directly. Okay. There is the situation where often people have a good relationship with their tax agent, and sometimes that's an efficient way of doing things because the tax agent can act as a complexity broker. But of course the agency itself rests with the business person.
All right. All right. Well, look, thank you very much, Chair. I said I'd be brief, and I was.
You were. Thank you very much, Senator Smith. Senator Smith.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your participation this evening. Ms Brown, in the United States, President President-elect Trump's business tax policy is set to restore the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act business tax provisions effective from the 1st of January 2026, which involves an 100% business or 100% bonus depreciation. Has the Treasury analysed the implications on Australia's international competitiveness if this proposal becomes law?
We covered this morning a bit.
Mr Robertson can help you with that one, Senator.
Hello, Senator. Marty Robinson, First Assistant Secretary, Corporate International Tax Division. So, look, we continue to monitor international developments as they arise, and in the ordinary course of our work, we're just keeping an eye on what's happening on the international policy front. I wouldn't say we have done any explicit modelling or particular analysis around the implications of particular policy changes. It's more something that we just keep a general watching brief on.
Have you provided any advice to government on President-elect Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act initiative?
So, Senator, we provide advice at various times to government on a range of matters. We have provided advice on US tax policy from time to time.
When was the last time you provided advice on US tax policy?
I think we covered some of this morning with Macro
Things have changed very quickly in the last few hours, Senator.
Well, it was unfolding when Macro Group were here, but we did go
it's clearer
through
now.
that the Secretary, I think, and Mr Emmons did talk about, you know, the various policies that they had looked at.
No, I think the Secretary talked specifically about tariffs.
That's right. Well, that was the example he gave. And so I think some of the answer to that question was answered this morning.
So, Mr Robinson, when was the last time advice was provided on US tax settings, corporate tax settings?
I couldn't recall that, Senator. I'd need to take that on notice and check.
Thanks very much. In the United Kingdom, they've introduced full expensing until the end of March 2026, where companies can claim 100% of the capital allowances on qualifying plant, machinery, etc. Has the Treasury done any analysis, modelling, provided any advice on the implications of that for Australia's international competitiveness?
Not that I can recall, Senator, but what I would say is that we have some experience from the Australian policy settings around temporary full expensing. As you'd be aware, that was a policy of the former government during the part of the response to the global COVID pandemic, and so. In fact, I think there was some analysis that was written around the effects of the temporary full expensing on investment in a box in one of the budget papers in, I think, the 2022 budget.
Right. Which neatly flows to my final question. Has Treasury considered the positive economic impacts of expanding the instant asset write-off and making it a permanent feature in Australia, given the international developments?
So, Senator, that's actually part of policy overlap with my colleague who looks after the...
But ultimately it's a matter for government. Yeah. I mean, Treasury provide advice, obviously, about instant asset write-off, other kinds of arrangements like that, and it's up to government about whether they're made permanent or the size of and value of that write-off. That is a matter for government.
So, but my question was specifically about advice given the changing or shifting international context.
Well, there's two answers to that. Once they do provide advice to government about tax arrangements, including concessions, and we consider those as part of our normal budget process, and Treasury have already confirmed that they do provide general advice to government about international economic conditions and changes that may be underway or particular policies that may have an impact on the Australian economy.
On notice, could you provide on what date was the last advice to government on the international, what was the last date on which advice was provided to government in regards to both the American President Trump initiative and the United Kingdom initiative in the context of our international competitiveness? On notice, that would be great. Very briefly, Ms Brown, are Australia's fundraising laws harmonised?
That's a question that goes to Markets Group, I'm afraid. That's their responsibility.
Okay.
They look after that.
I always get that wrong. At least I'm consistent. Would you like one of the other deputy secretaries did indulge me?
I don't think they have yet been harmonised.
Great. Thanks very much.
We're past that point. We're past the indulgent point of the day.
Briefly, some questions to the ACNC, if they're available. I think they're on the screen. Oh no, sorry. Here we are. Yep.
As I said earlier, Ms Woodward.
Sorry, Ms Brown. Sorry.
As I said earlier, Ms Woodward is absent, but we do have
correct.
two of her assistant commissioners present.
Thank you for your participation this evening. Yesterday I wrote to the Commissioner, admittedly it was late in the afternoon, just wanting an update in terms of some data that was provided to me in a letter from the Commissioner. Are you in a position to update that specific data that I requested?
Yes, was that in relation to the questions that you sent through yesterday?
That's right, yep.
Yes, Natasha Sekulik, Assistant Commissioner General Counsel. I understand that your question was regarding the protocols in place that the ACNC has to deal with inquiries and investigations.
So there were two sets of questions. There was an update on some data that was contained in a letter that Ms Woodward sent me on the 24th of June in regards to the incidents, in regards to ANC receiving concerns over links to terrorist organisations?
Yeah, I can start with that. So since the conflict started, we've had 146 concerns, and they relate to 26 charities. 11 are to do with terrorist financing, and they span both sides of the conflict. We have proceeded to investigate 8 organisations. 5 are ongoing, and 3 have been finalised.
And the 3 that were finalised, did that involve any action?
I'd need to take that on notice.
Okay. So on the 24th of June, when Ms Woodward provided me the original advice, we had 51 concerns. That's now risen to 146. Relating to 18 charities on the 24th of June, that's now risen to 26. And there were 11, the 11 figure related to what?
To terrorism and terrorism financing.
Yep. Of which 8 of the 11 led to investigations.
Not necessarily 11, so that's the out of the 11, out of the total 146, 8 have proceeded to investigation. And that's 11 concerns that were raised regarding terrorism or terrorism financing, not necessarily 11 organisations.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So meaning that they, a concern could a number of concerns could relate to one organisation, and 5 are ongoing.
That's correct.
And 3 have been resolved.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. And then to the second part of the correspondence. So the first question was, what protocols has the ACNC in place to deal with inquiries and investigations related to registered charities associated or activities with terrorist organisations and anti-Semitic activities? The second part was, what are the other federal government agencies are engaged through these protocols? And then thirdly, how many registered charities have been investigated by the ACNC due to a concern or over involvement in or links to anti-Semitic activities? Are you able to provide an answer to those questions now?
Yes, I can. Terrorism and terrorism financing is an established priority area for the ACNC with regards to our compliance priorities. So we already had protocols in place prior to the conflict arising. We hadn't had concerns raised about anti-Semitic behaviour prior to the conflict, though. That's a new area. When we are looking at triaging and determining which complaints proceed to investigation, we use a range of intelligence that might come from other agencies. It can stem from the media, it can come from those concerns, and it can also come from referrals from other agencies. So we triage to determine whether there is substance to the complaint, and then we may proceed to investigate. Noting that we regulate charities, we are not a law enforcement agency, and we can't pull back funds if they are sent offshore. So it's really important that we work holistically across government and determine who is the best placed regulator. So in terms of the actual agencies that we work closely with the AFP, we work closely with AUSTRAC, we work closely with DFAT. Those are on those big issues. There might also be smaller local issues at play, so there might be other regulators that we need to pull in, the police, consumer protection. So we do have a number of MOUs in place with other agencies that help us share information, and it might be that a particular organisation might be the best place to take the lead on an investigation. That doesn't mean the ACNC won't still conduct its own investigation, but it will do it in parallel because we don't want to jeopardise, say, the action of the AFP. No registered charities have been investigated by the ACNC due to concerns over involvement in or links to anti-Semitic activities at this date.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator McKim.
Thanks, Chair. I just got some questions. Hello, Ms Brown. Just got some questions about the work that Treasury did to look at changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions. The Treasurer did acknowledge that Treasury had been asked to model the impact of changes to those tax concessions in September.
I don't believe that that was the language that was used.
I beg your pardon?
I don't think the Treasurer has used that language.
Oh, well, I think that's a reasonable
That, well,
précis
no.
of... Well, anyway, perhaps I could just ask, was Treasury asked to have a look at
We've just gone through all that.
It's fine. I don't want to get into semantic argument.
Senator McKim, just for your benefit, just for your genuine benefit, these questions were asked by Senator Bragg, so you can ask them again, but they have been asked.
Thank you.
Senator McKim.
I'm not sure what Senator Bragg has asked. So, has Treasury done some work modelling potential changes to those tax concessions?
I think, as the Secretary said this morning to your question, Senator McKim, Treasury looks at this, at the impacts of negative on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but did you look at that again in September?
The reference to September throws me, sorry.
Beg your pardon?
The reference to September throws me.
I don't know what the September reference is either.
Well, I'm just asking, did you look at this and provide advice to government in September?
The Treasury does provide advice to the Treasurer on all aspects of the tax system, and the Treasurer has made clear it's not unusual, these are his quotes, not unusual for all governments or for Treasurers to get advice on issues which are in the public domain, including in the Parliament. This is all in September, so this is what he's been saying, and we've already confirmed that Treasury does provide advice on all matters relating to the tax system, of which negative gearing and capital gains tax is part of it.
Did Treasury provide advice to government on negative gearing and the capital gains tax concessions in September?
Senator, I think you might be referring to the document I was just referencing to Senator Bragg. There was an FOI request, number FOI 375. It has a document in it dated the 6th of September.
Yeah, no, I'm not referring to any FOI. I'm just simply asking, and just to be clear, I'm not asking what the content of the advice was. It's quite normal for government departments to disclose the timing of advice given to government. That happens all the time. Did Treasury provide advice to the government on negative gearing and CGT concessions in September? It's a pretty simple question. I don't know why it's so hard to get an answer.
I'll try and help, because I know you did ask this morning for a question. I noticed when did we last provide advice on negative gearing? And I do have the answer to that with me. So the last time we provided advice around the issue of negative gearing was the 1st of October.
This year?
This year.
Okay.
Yep. If I can just add some extra context to that, because I'm afraid I'm now going to get an avalanche of FOI requests for that document. So I'm going to take a little bit of an unusual step and indicate that the document that was provided on the 1st of October was the same document that is in the FOI that I've just referred to, FOI 3751. That was dated the 6th of September. For a new sitting period, we reissued that document. It was literally a reissuing with no additional information in it.
Thank you. Who asked Treasury for that advice? Was that the Treasurer's Office or the Prime Minister's Office?
So, as I said, if you go to FOI 375, you'll find that advice is a question time brief, which is just a brief we provide regularly. The Minister probably can answer more fully than I can. 2 ministers to prepare them for question time on issues that might be raised because it's been referenced in the papers from time to time, or they know that a particular member of Parliament has an interest in it. So it was in that context.
Okay. So that's a question time brief that was provided on the 1st of October. Yes. Previous to that, did Treasury provide any advice on those matters during September?
So we provided a QTB of the same form on the 6th of September.
Oh, it was the same document. It was the
same document.
Same document. So no other advice in September or early October outside those 2 Q2Bs?
I'm just going to check with Ms. Berger-Thompson. She might have a recollection of the dates. Again, we provided on a fairly... Yeah, we provided our tax expenditure statements towards the end of the year, but we may have given some preliminary advice on that around what do you want in the tax expenditure statement, and in that context provided information around negative gearing. I'd say it's kind of something we just do as part of our job to talk about negative gearing. But in finding that answer to your question on notice, we did look at other dates, and so we'll just see whether there was another date from the 6th of September to the one I've referenced. Bear with us while we look at messages.
Laura Berger-Thompson, First Assistant Secretary of the Personal and Indirect Tax and Charities Division. no, as far as we're aware, there was no other advice provided.
Okay, all right. Thanks very much. Got some questions to the ATO on the corporate tax transparency report. There's already been some discussion about that. I'm aware of that. But my understanding is that the ATO has provided or released data indicating 124 companies had assessments raised against them during the 2024 financial year to the value of about $2.76 billion. And the bulk of the liabilities, that is about $2.5 billion, was raised against 24 different taxpayers or 24 different companies following audit and review activities. Are those numbers? Am I speaking to you, Mr. Hirshon, here, or to Mr. Heffron?
So, Senator McKim, it'll be, I suspect, split between myself, Jeremy Hirshon, Second Commissioner, and Rebecca Saint, Deputy Commissioner, Public Groups.
So, is it right to say that the bulk of the liabilities, about $2.5 billion, was raised against 24 different companies following audit and review activities?
Yes, Senator.
Yep. So which sectors or industries are those 24 companies from?
Rebecca Saint, Deputy Commissioner, Public Groups.
Thank you.
So the assessments are actually split across a number of industries. So we do see that the mining sector, also retail sector, and other sectors as well. So there's no real dominant part of the population that you would say is attracting the bulk of those assessments. It is really reflective across the broader group.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. So could I ask how many were, I guess, what you could call resources companies, so basically mining or coal, oil, gas companies?
I would have to take that on notice, Senator.
All right, perhaps you could take on notice just a breakdown of what, how many of those 24 companies came from which different sectors? Yeah, thanks. Did the ATO engage in confidential settlement negotiations with any of those 24 companies?
Not as yet, Senator, is my understanding. And sorry, I should reframe that. Certainly it's not my understanding that we've concluded any settlements with those companies. Whether settlement negotiations may have occurred but not been successful, that may have happened during the year. But we'd have to take on notice to come back and give you a fulsome answer on that.
All right, and it's sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, not in respect to the 24, but we did obviously also publish in our annual report recently data around what settlements we did conclude during the year.
Yeah, thank you. And as part of that response on notice, if there have been any settlements with those 24 companies that were identified, what the original liability was and what was the final settled amount, if you're able to provide that. Last week, the ABC reported that, Ms Saint, that you had indicated that the government's bill that's before the Senate to impose a 15% domestic and global minimum tax rate will not solve Australia's global profit shifting issues. And I'm sorry if I've misquoted you there, I'm not intending to. Is that about right?
That sounds about right.
Yep, all right, thank you. Does that mean we're missing out, the Australian taxpayers are missing out, or the government, I guess, if you want to look at it like that, are missing out on revenue from large corporations due to global profit shifting? And if that's the case, has the ATO estimated how much we're missing out on in terms of potential tax revenue?
Senator, I think the question about the extent of profit shifting that occurs and any response that ought to be made, that's probably a policy issue more for our colleagues in the Treasury.
Well, perhaps, can I just ask, has the ATO estimated how much we're missing out on, given that Ms Saint has said publicly that Australia has global profit shifting issues?
Certainly we've got global profit shifting issues.
So you accept that? Yeah. So, and how big is that issue in financial terms?
Well, it depends on the counterfactual, because with our 30% rate, there'll always be an incentive for firms to shift profits to a lower tax jurisdiction. A good example would be Singapore. How much goes there and under what circumstance it goes there, I think would be, it's a sensible what's the counterfactual one would compare to.
Based on our current policy settings, how much are we missing out on?
I don't think there's a sense of missing out on something, because the question is what would you measure it against to determine what was being missed out on? If you know what I mean, like the 30%.
So you accept the premise that we've got a global profit shifting issue,
but there's always a challenge. There's always a challenge, no doubt about that.
So you accept that premise, but you can't quantify the amount.
Well, it would depend on the assumptions about how much would be shifted, where it would be shifted to, profitability at any point in time of an economic cycle.
But Mr. Heaven, I'm not asking about what would happen or could happen. I'm asking about what has happened. I'm asking about, like, how much did we miss out on last year?
Mr. Herschel may have a better insight than I do on this. So.
Yes, so Senator, and I might refer again to our annual report, here page 126, where we included table 4.6, our net tax gap estimates across market segments.
Yep.
Our estimate of the tax performance of the largest corporate groups, which are, of course, the groups which are, I suppose, by definition, both the largest, but also the most likely to be multinational, have multinational operations, and so the potential for profit shifting. Our estimate of that group is that after compliance activity, they are about 96% compliant. The flip side being about 4% theoretical tax unpaid across a tax base of in 21-22, which is our most recent numbers, our estimate of the net tax gap, so which is in a sense our estimate of all, in a sense, non-tax compliance by large companies. So profit shifting must be a subset of that.
Yeah.
It is in nominal dollars. That's about $3.6 billion.
Okay.
Sorry, I was just going to say, from a policy perspective, obviously, there's work that government has done to try and address that issue. There's a tax avoidance compliance task force that funds the ATO to do compliance work, but Mr. Robinson can probably tell you about some of the other areas of law or tax laws that are put in place to try and address profit shifting.
So, Senator, just going to the Pillar 2 global minimum tax, that's obviously been a global effort with countries negotiating that and developing the policy through the OECD. As you know, that's currently before the Parliament. That measure was estimated to raise about $370 million across the then forward estimates over to 26-27. And what that's demonstrating is that by sort of raising the base on that minimum tax that applies to those larger multinational entities, that we would expect to see some further revenue be taxed in Australia. Yep. As Ms Brown said, that's only one of a number of measures the government's also been implementing to try and address multinational tax avoidance. So another key measure of the government has been the changes to the thin capitalisation rules. And that was quite a substantial change in the rules around debt deductibility.
I'm
Last
sorry.
question.
I'm sorry, Mr. Robinson. I just have one more topic that I'm very short on time. So
you've got 1 minute. Thanks
very much for that. Well, I want to ask the ATO about the data that shows in 23-24 financial year, 22,000 people removed over $500 million from their superannuation to pay for dental treatment. Now, that's up from 66 million in 2018-19, a growth rate of, I said this earlier today, 693% over 6 years, 139% annual growth, basically in people taking money out of their super accounts, which are there to provide for a dignified retirement, and they're using them to fix their teeth. Has the ATO done any work to understand what the demographics are of people who are doing this? Has the ATO modelled the impact that this kind of withdrawal can have over the lifetime of somebody's super balances? I mean, the ABC's reported an economist who indicated if a 30-year-old person withdraws $20,000 to pay for dentistry, by the time they're set for retirement, it's cost them over $150,000 $1,000 in their super scheme. And have you done any work on that, and have you provided any advice to Treasury? Because it's an extraordinary circumstance where such a massive increase in people raiding their super funds just to fix their teeth.
So, Senator, I'll get Ms Rosenzweig to assist, but make one observation that the capacity to release superannuation on medical grounds, I think it's fair to say that in the ATO, we take the advice that's provided by the qualified medical professional. We take the view that the ethical obligations they have to their patients and to their profession is not something we're in a position to second guess. So if someone comes along with that information, we have to take it at their word.
Not a lot of qualified dentists in the ATO, Mr.
Well, we don't have a line of dental professionals. That is a good thought, though, Senator, but I'm not sure if we get the sufficient funding for that because they're quite expensive, I think.
Can I just clarify there? You wouldn't, because you're going to trust these professionals, you couldn't discern between cosmetic dental and essential dental. You rely on the professional qualification and the professional penalty of a person selling that product to a person who may be in great need or perhaps is being exploited.
Yeah, we're not dental professionals. Yep. We're not medical professionals.
And that rests with the professional body.
But I would just like to get Ms Rosenzweig to expand on that because, as you say, Senator, there is quite an increase.
So, Senator Emma Rosenzweig, Deputy Commissioner for Super and Employer Obligations. So your first question was about have we done any looking at demographics. We do actually publish annually a fair few statistics about the compassionate release of super scheme, and we do, part of that statistics are about demographics of the people who take out. So that is available on our website, and we have a range of age demographics across the various years, which might help you. We have not done any modelling on the long-term impact to retirement savings of people withdrawing their superannuation, but I have seen media reports that you've talked about. Commissioner is correct that we rely on the reports provided by medical practitioners. So an individual is required to have 2 independent medical practitioners certify their diagnosis, and it has to be a diagnosis that is one of the conditions prescribed in the legislation, and that the treatment they are applying for is necessary to treat that diagnosis. You know, as we've said, we don't have people who question those diagnoses or those appropriate treatments.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I'll go now to Senator Rennick. Senator Rennick.
Yes, thanks, hi, guys. I'll just follow up on Senator McKim's questions about profit shifting, and I'll just pick on one particular withholding tax rate, and that is in regards to Ireland. The withholding tax rate to Ireland is 10% on royalties. Ireland has a company tax rate of 12.5 cents, so 10 plus 12.5 cents. Less the 30-cent tax deduction here gives someone who wants to shift profits to Ireland a 7.5-cent arbitrage. Why have we got such a low withholding tax rate on royalties paid to Ireland, knowing that a number of multinationals use that to shift profits offshore?
So, Senator, I might make a comment on that Australia at a 30% corporate tax rate used to be in line with OECD averages and is now a relatively high rate. And I think the comment before that was quoted about from Ms Saint says that when we have a high corporate tax rate and other countries have lower corporate tax rates, there are incentives to what we would describe as transfer misprice. The tax system is based on transfer pricing, but what we're concerned about is transfer mispricing. To your comment, I suspect in Ireland, I'm just maybe the arbitrage is actually higher than that because in Ireland they would likely get a credit for our withholding tax.
Oh, right,
but,
okay.
I would say that withholding rate is in line with the treaty network. Why that is the case is more a policy question.
So I haven't got a lot of time. So what's stopping us, Australia, as an independent sovereign country, from resetting our treaty with Ireland to say, well, there's a clear arbitrage here. We're going to lift the withholding tax rate to say 20 cents. so that the cumulative tax rate is 32, so that we actually disencourage our profits earned here going offshore. Do we have the power to do that as an independent sovereign country?
That's probably a policy question for Treasury, Senator Rennie, but Mr. Robertson.
Perhaps I can help you with that one. So under our network of double tax agreements that we have with countries, many of those are long-standing, and just during that discussion I was just checking the date that we agreed a DTA with Ireland, and it was 1983, so that's quite a long-standing treaty. Yep. And that withholding rate on royalties of 10% would have been negotiated as part of the negotiation of that treaty. For Australia to change a withholding rate in respect of flows of payments to another jurisdiction that's governed under a double tax agreement, we would essentially need to engage in a renegotiation of the DTA and seek to vary it as part of that process.
And how hard is that? Because 1983, Ireland didn't have a company tax rate of 12.5 cents. What mechanisms do we have that when these countries on the other half of the tax treaty lower their tax rates, with a view to attracting capital, that we automatically go, well, hang on here, A plus B minus 30, tax arbitrage. What are we doing to stop the leakage of profits offshore? What active steps do you guys, tax or Treasury, I don't care who, take to stop the leakage of profits offshore? And notwithstanding that most politicians don't understand this, they're not watching this stuff. I mean, I do, but most of my colleagues don't, and that's okay, they can't keep their eyes on everything. So it's up to you guys as the guardians to stop those profits from going offshore.
I understand that, Senator. So what I would say, I'll give you a two-part response, I guess. So Treasury is very active in the OECD around the base erosion and profit shifting program. We've been quite active through that. Successive governments have implemented a range of measures, that have largely emanated from the OECD work to try and address base erosion and profit shifting issues. In relation to specific DTAs, the government, we review the program periodically and provide advice to government, and it's then up to government to agree to a program. We currently have a program which has us pretty full on tax treaty negotiations and renegotiations out to the end of 2027.
Okay, because I know PWC keep up, you can Google PWC tax treaties, and they've got a whole list of countries, interest, withholding, dividends, interest, and what was the other one, royalties. Do you guys keep a spreadsheet like that where you go and add it all up to see whether or not it's greater than or less than 30% to detect these arbitrage opportunities?
I'd say, Senator, in our broader scanning of tax developments globally, we do keep an eye on it. Whether I could say that we have a specific spreadsheet or not, I don't know, but we do make an effort to keep an eye on developments globally.
Okay, now and can I just one more?
Thanks, Senator Rennie.
So as I said, for interest, dividends, and royalties, we don't do it for rent. So, and I asked this to Treasury this morning, if you're a small business person, you employ one person, you've got to upload those person's your employee's wages to the tax office. If you're a company, you pay dividends, you've got to upload it to the tax office. Why don't real estate agents have to upload the rent that they pay to the tax office, and in particular the rent they pay offshore? Because my concern is we're not tracking foreign investment of property here in Australia, and the Australian Federal Police just recently seized 3,000 hectares of land in Tasmania that was through...
Okay, we'll get an answer from Mr Robinson on that, if we can, a brief one.
So I think in this sort of specific situation, generally what would happen is you'd look at the Australian source income, and rent is a source of income. That would generally require that a foreign resident needs to, file a tax return.
But why can't a real estate agent do it?
Okay, I'm going to share the call.
That's an important question, Chair. This is money laundering. That this is a really.
I'm going to share the call with Senator Bragg if you want to finish your answer, Mr Robinson.
Look, I would just say that it's a general compliance issue. It's a general tax compliance issue.
Policy. That's a matter for government policy, is it?
The ATO might also provide information.
Thank you, Ms Brown. Senator Bragg.
I just wanted to thank you very much, Chair. Just wanted to come back to where we were before in traversing the negative gearing advice issue. So I'm just trying to nail down whether your evidence tonight is that the advice you've given to government is contained into the question time brief, or whether there are more elements than just that.
So I suppose advice on negative gearing covers a range of circumstances. That's just the most recent advice we provided, effectively, given my answer to Senator McKim. But we provided advice on other instances and other context over time around the operation of tax laws generally and operation of negative gearing provisions more specifically. So the tax expenditure statement the Treasury has referred to, that provided advice on and modelling on the value of negative gearing, as another example.
Okay, so the Treasurer gave an interview with, I think it was Steve Kinane on ABC, RN Breakfast on 30 September 2024. Do you know about that one, broadly speaking?
Only very broadly.
Yeah, but I understand there's a lot of media to go through.
There's a lot of ones they've gone through.
So, Kinane said, so why is it a state secret about whether you asked for that advice or not, question mark. Chalmers said, it's not. I've made it clear on a number of occasions now that in the course of the best part of a week that I got this advice because it was a contentious issue. So I got this advice. So what is the advice?
There's a couple of things going on here. One, the advice in the FOI document, so the QTB, that is advice. And then there are a range of other ways during the normal course of a year that Treasury would brief the Treasurer about all elements of the tax system. So the Treasurer would be relying on that advice that's been released under FOI, but he would be also relying on, discussions and knowledge he has about the operation of the tax system.
Because he's referring to advice, so I imagine he's referring to modelling.
Well, no, I don't think you can presume that.
Just a QTB.
I don't think you can presume.
That's all
well,
it is.
That's not what I've just answered, Senator Bragg. I said he gets a range of information, like the tax expenditure statement when that comes out. Is that what it's called these days?
Tax expenditure insight statement.
Insight statement. That will have a section on CGT and rental deductions through negative gearing, like it does every year. That will be a piece of advice from the Treasury to the Treasurer. Through the course of updating the budget, the Treasurer would be briefed on what's happening with the tax system. So, it would form part of those briefings, it's constant and ongoing.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about a couple of other quick things then, because I know we're short on time. So, in terms of the instant asset write-off, did Treasury provide any advice or analysis to the Treasurer or Assistant Treasurer about whether the coalition or crossbenches amendments to the instant asset write-off contained in the TLAB Small Business Concessions and Other Measures Bill 23?
I would have to ask...
Well, they were amendments that were put in the Senate from memory, were they?
Just wondering if there's any
So
advice.
I expect there would have been discussion at a minimum about what those amendments would do, including their fiscal impact.
So do you have that advice?
So we can't go into the advice as such. That would not be usual convention.
No, nice
we
try.
can let you know if we did
Very secretive.
provide advice.
It's advice to government. It's
Many secrets.
long-standing
Many.
practice.
Many secrets. So what can you tell me about this advice?
So Bede Fraser, Assistant Secretary, Personal and Indirect Tax and Charities Division. Sorry, Senator, would you mind repeating the question for me?
Do you provide any advice or analysis on the question of the instant asset write-off contained in the TLAB Small Business Concessions and Other Measures Bill?
So as part of the normal process,
when there are amendments.
Well, we had, yeah. I mean, because we have to speak to the amendment, so of course you get advice. But we don't have to go to what that advice said.
So you can't table that?
No.
Okay.
And the amendment didn't get up.
Why is the government refusing to support these amendments? They're much cheaper than the $13.9 billion in tax credits.
Well, that's, that's been a decision of government. And when you're talking about the production tax credits, are you?
Yeah.
I think that was a slightly different number that I had in my head for that, but well, that's a measure that's supporting our Future Made in Australia agenda, and the instant asset write-off was a measure I think we agreed in the budget, perhaps.
Because is there a policy?
Doing different things.
But is there a policy reason why the government has insisted on keeping the threshold at 20,000?
Well, it's a decision in the budget.
Okay. Look, I just want to come back to this issue that we've been talking about a few times now, about this modelling. So, is it your position, is it the position of the government minister, that the extensive media reports which talk about the existence of dedicated work on reform options, on CGT and negative gearing, by a range of senior journalists, many others are actually factually incorrect?
Well, I don't have all of those reports before me, Senator Bragg, but I have stood in a couple of press conferences with the Treasurer where a question around specific modelling has been raised, and the Treasurer has answered that he wouldn't, you're assuming that there's something that exists that doesn't. So
okay, so you're saying there's not?
Well, I can certainly say I haven't seen any. And I have no idea where stories come from that get published in the paper,
So James Massola, David Gray and Galloway are wrong? Anthony Galloway, my apologies, are wrong. The story is factually incorrect.
I haven't got all those stories in front of me, but all the origins of that story. So I know what the government, what work the government has been doing. Journalists obviously are going to get stories from other people and run them.
What I find curious about the QTB, if I may, is it was updated on the 6th of September, and I'm not as familiar as others with QTBs, but there's no reference whatsoever to any of the media stories that appeared around the 25th of September. And I would regard that as, if I was a minister, I'd regard that as quite a significant oversight. So it was updated
on the 6th of September for stories that appeared on the 25th of September.
But I thought...
How could it have foreshadowed
but I thought Ms Brown said that the QTB was updated for the Treasurer.
Well, it was updated for the sitting week, Inspector Smith.
I am doing my best. I am doing my best, Minister.
D.I. Smith.
Well, I was coming to a PI claim.
The normal course of business is that you would update the QTB for the sitting period. And it's not normal. I mean, sometimes there may be links to media stories in QTBs, but it wouldn't be Treasury's normal.
No, that's not true. Under the heading negative gearing, you go to some extent to talk about the Greens' position as recorded in the Australian Financial Review on the 12th of February 2024.
What I'm saying is it wouldn't necessarily provide immediate commentary, necessarily. I mean...
It does seem rather strange, though, James Massola, David Gray, Anthony Galloway all getting it wrong.
I'm going to share the call in a moment.
We've really got nothing further to add.
Yep, Senator Bragg.
just briefly, before I get wound up on build to rent, because I asked about this before I was told to come back to revenue. Is that here?
Build to rent is here, Senator. Yeah.
So we had a discussion at June 2024 estimates and was asking you how many houses would be constructed under the build to rent tax subsidy you are proposing for foreign fund managers. How many new houses will be built if your bill passed Parliament?
Susan Bultitude, I'm the Assistant Secretary of Corporate International Tax Division. Pleasure to be here again and discuss this topic, Senator Bragg. So I can give you a little bit of an update. There have been a number of private sector estimates of how many houses will be built through, or dwellings rather, will be built through the build to rent bill. So initially, if you go back to sort of when the policy was first announced, there were numbers around the private sector saying around, over 10 years, around 150,000 dwellings would be built. Since then, I believe that there are some revised forecasts out. Some of those have been revised downwards to around 100,000 over those 10 years.
100,000, and these are all owned by foreign fund managers?
No, that's the dwellings in the build to rent sector. So they could be owned by...
How many new houses will be built under the build to rent policy? The bill?
They have to be new.
So they have to be new.
So how many?
So as I said, the private sector estimates, so I've seen revised ones around for the private sector that say around 100,000 over 10 years. Obviously, there are varied estimates, but around 100,000 over 10 years.
And so where do you think most of these fund managers would come from?
So I think...
American, Chinese, what do you think? Middle Eastern?
So I think, as we've said before, there's... so Australia doesn't have a build-to-rent sector. There's not a lot of experience here. There is big experience, especially in the UK, Canada and the US. So we'd probably expect investors to be coming in from those. Obviously, there's no restriction on where investors come from other than our usual foreign investment restrictions.
So can foreign governments that set up investment agencies get this tax cut? So could the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority get access to it?
So the requirements for under the MIT regime is to be a widely held entity, so something like a foreign fund manager, something like a foreign superannuation or pension fund. So those are the ones that are...
So you could be BlackRock or Vanguard, but you could also be the Abu Dhabi Investment Corp.
I can't comment on an individual taxpayer. I could take it on notice as to whether foreign government-owned entities of a certain type.
You've got to be foreign. That's the key criteria, right?
For the concession on the MIT withholding rate, that withholding rate only applies to flows from managed investment trusts to foreign investors, and the bill takes that down from 30 to 15. So it's only relevant for the foreign investors. Right. Of course, as we've spoken before, all investors, domestic or foreign, have access to the other concession, which is the faster capital works deductions, the increase in the capital works deduction.
Houses Australians can never own. Thanks very much.
Senator Pocock.
Thank you. If I can just go back and conclude my questioning around PWC and then move on to some tax issues, I'd like to return to Ms Beattie's file note, where she says that you, Mr Hirshhorn, advised Mr Sayers that it was unlikely that the ATO would take action in regard to the multinational anti-avoidance law, the MAL. I take that to mean that you said it was unlikely that the ATO would pursue prosecution of PWC over the MAL workaround because it was too difficult, and this was, and I quote from the bottom of her note, that first page, like a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. I'm concerned about the telegraphing of, not just the telegraphing, but the stance of, and the notion of a get-out-of-jail-free card from the ATO. What's your comment on that?
Yes, so Senator, maybe give context on a couple of aspects. I think I've previously given testimony that the promoter penalty rules have been proven and their current format to not be particularly apt for dealing with the sort of transactions that we had under the MAL schemes. And for various reasons, and without advocating for or against legislation, which is in progress, there are basically, I think, proposed amendments. I'm not sure if they've come through yet. Maybe they have come through. to the promoter penalty legislation to make them more appropriate for these sorts of schemes. I'm not sure if I used those exact words in that meeting, but the sense of that meeting, and I can understand why a simplistic reading of that note would give that impression. The purpose of that discussion with Mr Sayers was that the advice I had received from the teams is that we were likely to have to give up on the promoter penalty investigation that we had been going through, that we were not going to be able to make it stick. The point of the discussion with Luke Sayers was to not give him the false impression that meant, if that happened, that would mean that somehow we approved of their behaviour, that we still had extraordinary concerns with their behaviour, and so that they should not take, if that so happened, that we did not pursue the promoter penalty, he should not take that as a positive sign, that this was still a very serious concern from our perspective.
Thanks for that explanation. Commissioner, if I can come to you as a new leader of the ATO, what is your approach and stance on the practices of those kind of discussions and that prospect of a possible get-out-of-jail-free card that they read at PWC as a way out of prosecution? What's your approach to these issues?
I guess listening to Mr Hershorn's answer, I think the characterisation of us putting forward, well, this could be a get-out-of-jail card, I don't think that's, from my listening to the conversation and discussing this internally, I don't see that as a position that was put forward. Rather, it was the point that simply because it may be difficult to pursue an investigation down the promoter penalty path, even though that would be difficult, might not be able to do it, it doesn't mean that we accept that the behaviour was appropriate. If I go to the sort of the more general point, I think when we engage with discussions with essentially any taxpayer or taxpayer representative that we deal with, our first task is to understand the issue, to act with empathy, to act with respect, to apply the law, and to be clear about what we're going to do. Then to make sure that's recorded correctly, which of course in this case is the evidence that Mr Hershorn did, and then ensure any follow-up is done in a concrete way. So if we say we're going to do something, we need to proceed and do it. And if we give a commitment when they're not going to do something, and that commitment will only be given for good reason, we make sure we don't. So they're general comments about how I'd like to see officers operate. My observation is that that's precisely what we do. And so I think I might leave it there.
While you've got the floor then, can I move on to a tax matter in relation to MinRes and Chris Ellison? Is it true, as been publicly reported, that, and this goes to some of the comments you made in your opening contribution, is it true, as been publicly reported, that Mr Ellison's lawyers came to the ATO to voluntarily disclose a decade-long tax evasion scheme operating from around 2003 to 2014, is that right?
Well, as the committee would know, that the circumstance of individual taxpayers, we're not at liberty to discuss those.
There's been an enormous amount of public discussion with you're not willing to enter into any of the factual correction or confirm what we have been reading?
I think my understanding is the law is very clear on that respect. The confidentiality of taxpayer information needs to be kept confidential. There are particular exceptions in the Tax Administration Act in Section 355. The idea of sort of participating in the public debate to try to correct material issues of fact, that's not one of them. So I think the comments I made in my opening statement about in the general proposition where a taxpayer comes forward, or their agent on their behalf comes forward to make good what has happened in the past, and they do that before we undertake any audit activity or before any connection with them, the law is very clear. The 80% remission of the penalty that otherwise apply, which I know has been picked up in some commentary in the MinRes case, and whilst I can't comment on that specific case, but in general, where a taxpayer or their representative comes forward to make good on a previous issue, in this case, even if it was a case of, I misspoke there, if it was a situation of in the abstract concept of evasion, then they would have to pay the tax, they'd have to pay the interest, and then there would still be a penalty attached. But the Act is very clear that penalty must be remitted by 80% in circumstances where they come forward.
And is that, I hear you saying that you are required to do that, and I hear you're not willing to talk about MinRes, though the rest of the universe is very interested in it, certainly the board and the shareholders. If the disclosure is made in the shadow of clear knowledge that the ATO are knocking on the door and there will be a fine, is it still considered a voluntary disclosure and they still get an 80% reduction on the penalty? Because there's a big difference, is there not, between knowing you're going to be hit tomorrow or getting years of notice that you're going to be hit and being someone who just made an honest mistake or comes genuinely to you not knowing you have any knowledge of it.
So if I can speak in the again in the abstract, it is hypothetical, so I'm aware that I probably shouldn't be talking about hypotheticals, but in this case I think may be useful. The provision's clear that it has to be done before any action, any communication takes place. Where it happens after, there is a different provision that will apply, the same provision, sorry, different subsection that will apply. And then there's a question of judgment that we would have my officers would exercise about, is this, if someone comes forward, is it before any activity or has it been prompted by a particular activity? I think if my officers thought this has been prompted by a particular activity, so it wasn't to try to make good the past, then I suspect we would have to have a different look and to see, are the conditions of that provision satisfied?
So there is a subjective element there for you to judge whether it is a genuine voluntary.
Okay, the Act is clear that it has to be a voluntary disclosure. And if there's a thought, well, actually this is not a voluntary disclosure, rather there's something else that has brought that on, then that would be a material factor in looking at the application of the provision.
And Senator, it might be worthwhile, we can forward you a copy of the provision. The trigger.
I've been forwarded.
The trigger is about notification. The trigger is about notification. And so, if we have notified, then it is no longer a voluntary disclosure. If we have not yet notified, then even if the person may be fearing, well, can I say that not many voluntary disclosures are purely done through. How would I say it? A complete change of face. There is usually a fear of the tax office at some stage. But if we have not notified the taxpayer, the provision is very clear.
And if last question,
oh my God, if a voluntary if a settlement is made and it emerges that a full disclosure has not been made.
Sorry, Senators, it wouldn't be a settlement. Are you talking about a voluntary disclosure?
Yeah.
Yeah, so because a settlement is where we actually discussed with the taxpayer about what the appropriate amount of tax should be. The voluntary disclosure that I mentioned in my opening statement, there's no concept of a settlement there.
Yeah.
There's someone coming along saying, I forgot, or what advice to say I was bad.
Yeah.
So that's not a settlement. That's the voluntary disclosure.
Okay, so let's leave aside the settlement.
But Senator, what I would
language.
say is, of course, if somebody has not fully disclosed their information, it is not a voluntary disclosure because it is not a full disclosure.
Okay, but if you have completed a voluntary disclosure with someone, and subsequently learn that there was not a full disclosure and there were further matters, what are the consequences for that disclosure?
Well, then, Senator, there are going to be a range. There are going to be a very significant range of consequences. For obviously, further tax, further penalties, false and misleading statement.
And can I ask in relation to...
Sorry, just to be clear, sir, in that situation, the idea of the 80% reduction in penalty would not apply.
Okay, so it's back on the table.
I've got... Final?
Last bit.
Okay.
I understand that in some settlements, let's stay hypothetical, agreements are made to not refer matters to other agencies like the AFP and regulatory agencies. How often do you do that?
I think for the... and to be clear here, again, we're not talking about the settlement. I think the voluntary disclosure. And just be clear, in case obviously the committee may be concerned, in a situation where there is a non-tax crime, to say there's a voluntary disclosure, but we are concerned that the income that's being voluntarily disclosed is a result of illegal activity, or there's some non-tax crime associated with the activities. The idea of we simply wouldn't give any commitment not to pass that on to the relevant authorities. The police, largely be the AFP in that situation. Where there's suspicion of a tax crime, well, prima facie, if there is evasion that has occurred, prima facie there is a tax crime. The point of the provisions that were in the original self-assessment, when the self-assessment system was legislated, the point of that was to take it out of sort of the judicial framing, put it into the administrative penalty framing, and so to encourage people to come forward. So in that situation, what's important is to collect the revenue, to collect the money, and make sure the interest is paid, make sure the penalty is paid. In that situation, then pursuing someone for the tax crime as well, basically taking the money, using the administrative penalty, and then saying, and actually that's going to be referred to the federal police for tax crime, there will be no voluntary disclosures. The idea of the admin...
So how often?
I've got to go to Senator Smith.
So I haven't had an answer to the question.
Just on the number, I think it would be best if we took that on notice.
Thank you.
And came back with
with the details of that.
But I would say that, Senator, can I just say, in our very significant programs to encourage voluntary disclosure over the years, so both Project Do It from, I think, 2014 and the OVDI initiative, which predates that, in both of those programs, this was the approach we took across the program.
Senator Smith.
So it's a practice for 15 years plus.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Last two questions from me this evening. Ms Brown, is it your evidence that the most recent advice to the Treasurer on capital gains tax and negative gearing reform provided by the Treasury is the QTB dated the 6th of September?
On the basis of a search of our records, we believe that the last advice we provided to the Treasurer was on the 1st of October, and that was in the form of the QTB that was released in the FOI that I referred to.
And the QTB dated the 6th of September?
It was updated.
Updated, it says on the document, yes.
Yes, to reflect the fact that it was in the sitting period. That's a search of our records, that's what that indicates.
Thank you. Minister, excluding the tax expenditure and insights statement, is it your evidence that the government has not at any point commissioned or considered modelling on reform options for negative gearing, tax concessions and capital gains tax concessions in the last 6 months?
It's getting very late, Senator Smith. My evidence that I've given consistently through the day is that the government receives advice on, the Treasurer receives advice, but the ERC would also, when considering budgets of my EFO, consider advice about the operation of the tax system. It's an ongoing responsibility that governments have.
Thank you.
I think we can give you one question, Senator Pocock. Last question.
Could I ask Mr O'Neill to come to the table? I wanted to ask a question of the CEO of the TPB, if I may.
that I had a line of questioning with regard to NIMRES. That the big questions on notice, with particularly the intersection between the potential impact on shareholders of the use of funds from the publicly listed company to support offshore transactions, if there's any intersection there, how that might impact your communications with ASIC or any other bodies.
So those questions will go unnoticed. Thanks, Senator O'Neill. So one question, Senator Pocock.
My question for you, Mr O'Neill. We have canvassed many of the ways in which you were the CEO of the TPB was affected as the process of the inquiry into PWC unfolded. And I particularly wanted to ask about the conditions and the security of the employment of the CEO position at the TPB, which was put at risk multiple times through multiple mechanisms, which are documented in the report of the Senate inquiry especially. I went through it in detail in our additional comments. And I wanted to ask you, and it's clear that regulators need security and they need protection. Do you have confidence that the security and protection that is essential to do the job exists for the CEO at the TPB now, both for you personally but also into the future for your successors?
Thanks, Senator Michael O'Neill, the Secretary of the TPB. The short answer is yes. I'm an ongoing public servant, and I've had discussions with my chair and with the Commissioner about my tenure and my position. The proposition that arose from Keith James' report, and specifically recommendation 3.2, proposed different arrangements for my employment and the hiring and firing of the CEO position more generally. Those arrangements have not been implemented.
And do you have confidence they won't be implemented for your successors in the longer term? Because this is a critical question that we don't see insecurity introduced into the leadership role of a regulator.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any intention to implement that arrangement.
Thanks for your indulgence.
Thank you very much. That concludes the questions the committee has for Treasury Revenue Group, ATO, TPB, ACNC. You go with our thanks. Thank you. This committee stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.